A girl reflects on the popular autumn game where you play as a simpleton prodigy and try to start a relationship with three charming young men while looking at your phone. She is looking at her phone when a truck suddenly comes at her. In the background, the girl thinks that she would choose a thief as her favorite in the game because she looks like her. She wants to be reborn as a successor thief and live peacefully. But why do the main male and female characters fight? For her, two men are standing in the palace, demanding that the girl release the hostage, to whose throat she put a knife. The girl is frowning. The hostage asks not to harm her because she trusts Penny's sister. The blue-haired man harshly cuts off this request, saying that she is too kind, and while it once worked for him, it won't work on this greedy girl. He reaches to retrieve his sword from its scabbard. This scene turns out to be a projection on the wall of a high-rise building. It depicts three men in royal clothes, with red, blue, and blonde hair. Three girls in school uniforms watching the scene enthusiastically praise the king. They continue to discuss the plot, about Chaolunuo, who turned out to be the master's son, and Raphael, who is hardly remembered, although this is a game about him. When they were about to cross the pedestrian crossing, they were suddenly interrupted by a woman, asking them to give way. The girls are apologizing, until suddenly they notice the earrings on the woman. This is a limited jewelry that can be obtained only for Rainy Night at Thrones. At 6:38 p.m. on June 3rd, 2021, Maiganer, in the year of Shincho. A woman with earrings receives a message from the company, Rainy Night at Thrones, with an offer to take part in the survey as a player from the Golden List for an exclusive gift. A woman is looking at her phone while crossing the road, answering a questionnaire. One of the questions is which character she likes the most and why. She replies that the character is a thief because she looks like her. The yellow light of headlights distracts her. A truck flies onto the road. The questionnaire asks the last question. What does she expect from the game? The phone falls next to the girl in a pool of blood and breaks. I want to be loved. Suddenly, the screen lights up blue, indicating that the data collection is complete. A portal to the digital world appears in it, which pulls her in. A girl in a pink dress and long golden hair appears from the other side of the space. The phone welcomes her to Rainy Night at Thrones. The maid wakes up the golden-haired girl, who now looks like a child, calling her Mrs. Penny. She asks to behave well, remembering the origin. She is Penny Gladstone, the eldest daughter of the Gladstone family, the most respectable family, not considering it royal. The shocked girl examines the palace in which she is. She remembers Penny holding a dagger to her hostage's neck with a scowl. From birth, hopes were placed on Penny. She was supposed to inherit the crown of God's daughter and bring glory to the family. But it became a delusion. The name changes, and all hope disappears. People around now pay attention to the little girl with purple hair. Jealousy and resentment broke her pure heart. This is the plot of the game. Rainy Night at Thrones, and she is now Penny, a thief from the game, with a beautiful face. The woman says that she loved automny games in her past life, and now she became a participant after she was hit by a truck. She is indignant. Why not pay attention to the main character Claire Burrow and not to the thief? The maid combs the girl's hair, dresses her, washes her, saying that today there will be a family dinner, which does not happen often. She asks her to be energetic. The servants hotly discuss how difficult it is to emphasize the girl's perfect beauty and keep her hair in order. They run, some, to the merchant of precious stones, some, to the most popular clothes of the year. But the girl is hungry, so she jumps on the maid to stop her using her charm and apologizes. The maid freezes and falls unconscious due to feelings. She is a tsundere and really loves Penny. The girl wants to focus on the tyrant Duke Giorno Gladstone. Perhaps this was done to destroy her relatives. In the game, her death was caused by him, Penny's biological brother. He usually spent time in the Knights' camp, so he had a close relationship with his sister. The girl decides that she needs to be careful not to provoke him. Suddenly, she knocks her head on someone's clothes. Raising his head, it turns out that he is a brother. But now she is only a 10-year-old child, no matter how cruel he will be to her in the future, so she just happily greets him. Ignoring her, he lifts the girl by her clothes with one hand and indifferently asks the maid who it is. Ta laughs, saying that in 4 years, Mr. Chaolunuo had already forgotten his sister. The girl sulks. The guy calls her a monster and pulls her cheeks. Penny gets angry in her mind and hits him. Chow says that he always feels like she's picking on him. The maid offers him to join the breakfast, but he refuses because he has just arrived and needs to say hello to his mother first. The girl wonders why she never heard about their mother in the game. She thinks that maybe if she can win her mother's love, she can survive the game. This is a great opportunity. She asks her brother to wait and runs after him. They walk down the corridor in silence. The mother is sitting outside in the square. She is incredibly beautiful. Golden hair, blue eyes, green, long dress. She praises Penny for coming, then grabs her and spins her around. The guy says that she spoils her too much. In response, his mother teases him, saying that it would be nice if he acted like a child too, and hugs Penny. Chow Lunuo says he only came to accompany her to breakfast, but the mother refuses. She says that Penny will also go with her, and hugs her. The girl calms down in her arms and closes her eyes, wondering if her mother's embrace is really that warm. She remembers how in her previous, real life, her mother screamed hysterically, threw things at her, kicked her out, and said that it would be better not to give birth to her at all. The girl started bleeding from a book hitting her head. With a depressed, indifferent look, she silently listens to the screams. "Mom, I'm sorry, I will work hard, that's why." The girl is pulled out of a bad dream. It's Chow tapping her forehead. Mom explains that she was scared because she didn't wake up for a long time, repeating, "I'm sorry," and asks if she had a nightmare. The girl laughs confusedly, remembering fragments of a dream. She wonders if it was a memory from a past life and what kind of person she was there. Why can't she remember that? The mother excitedly asks if her illness has gone away and asks to speak if she suddenly feels sick. Chow brushes it off, saying that she just overslept. The boy informs that he has returned home because the day of sacrifice will soon be here. Penny asks what it is, munching on the chocolate. Every 5 years, the Temple of Ernest holds a day when the future heirs of the main families visit them and listen to divine prayers. The girl mentions that this event is one of the updates of the game. She thinks that she needs to get to the festival. Maybe that way she will find a game development team and find a way back. Penny excitedly says that she also wants to participate in the sacrifice to God. She looks up in shock. Chow approaches the girl, leaning menacingly. He says that only the future heir of the family can participate, and, grasping the hilt of the sword, asks if she wants to fight him for the title of heir to the Gladstone family. The girl is frightened and says that she did not understand this, and in fact, she just wanted to play. She decides in her mind that she needs to be more careful not to die. She hopes that her mother will save her. She drinks a glass of tea and begins to cough. A servant with Chow rushes to her. The maid says that the doctor forbade her to drink ginseng tea, but he apologizes, saying that everything is fine. Penny wonders which doctor they're talking about and why she never appeared in the game. The girl remembers the footage from the game. In them, the grown-up Penny grabs Chow by the collar, saying why he forgot about his mother, and treats that girl so well, even though it's all because of her. He pushes her and tells her to stop blaming others. Maybe Penny killed her. "Why doesn't it work?" Sobbing, says Penny, putting her hands on her mother's body. At this time, she is lying on the bed and comforts her, saying that it is not her fault, but God's will, and it was God who gave her Penny. A blue glow emanates from the girl's hands. She thinks it's all because of her, because she's not really her daughter, so it doesn't work. In fact, she is the mistake that killed her mother. That's why she didn't attack Claire. The power that God gave disappears when you watch the death of a loved one, so you can't do anything. This pain of loss does not go away, it only turns into rage towards others. Penny sees the girl with purple hair again, surrounded by 3 boys. Sad loser thief. That's why she looks so much like her. Penny's life is similar to her past, the girl thinks. The girl realizes that her mother's life is coming to an end, and clings to her. The mother jokes, asking if Penny really wants to be an heiress. When she answers yes, she says that she would like her daughter to find a job she loves, marry her lover, and start a family. But if she wants, she can become an heir, and she will support her. The girl jumps out of her mother's arms and runs out of the palace while a servant calls her. In her mind, she says that she does not want it to end like this, because she is different from the other woman. She gently strokes her hair, and she will die in a year. The girl shouts that she does not want such an end. Penny is running outside when suddenly an arrow slices through her cheek. She runs out into the training grounds. A guy with red hair, with a bow in his hands, and the archers behind him look at her in shock. But Penny gives them a confident, non-childish look. She intends to prevent such an end. A red cut is visible on the girl's cheek. The sniper team rushes to Penny to make sure she's okay. One of the boys freezes. Did this girl, who looks like a 10-year-old child, just have such a terrifying look? Angry Chow grabs the girl's hand and yells at her to leave. But Penny can't. She has to contact the developers of the game to save her mother. Therefore, the girl finds a way out of the situation. She makes a charming face and throws herself into her brother's arms. The guys around are shocked. They didn't know that the Gladstone family had such a warm relationship. Chiao gets annoyed, grabs Penny by the collar, and throws her over the fence, saying that it's too dangerous here. She shouldn't come here anymore. The girl is happy. Chow is not as angry with her as in the game, so she will be able to make a good impression. The very next day, she goes everywhere after her brother, trying to serve him. She brings cookies, water, constantly spins next to him. This behavior annoys the boy. It is too dangerous for the child. Meanwhile, Penny happily runs to him with a first aid kit. Suddenly, one of the magicians, training, releases a purple layer of magic directly in her direction. Chow shouts, trying to warn them. He grabs Penny and covers her from the purple layer, knocking it blue from his hands. A loud explosion sweeps across the training ground. When the frightened girl opens her eyes and looks up, drops of blood fall on her face. It is her brother's wounded hand, which still shines with a blue glow. He looks at her with a firm look and says that he warned. It's really dangerous for her here. A sign was posted on the gate of the training camp, prohibiting Penny from entering, otherwise the prepared protective magic would work. The girl is indignant. She didn't know that Chow would rush to block the attack in front of her. Penny sees a girl with green pigtails approaching the gate. She runs up to her and asks if everything is fine with her brother. But he tells her that he was healed, so there will be no problems on the day of sacrifice, and on the trip to the dark forest next week too. The girl wonders, isn't this a forest with high-level monsters? She wonders why they are there. It turns out that although monsters become more active every summer, it is at this time that the flower, Tears of Ernest, will bloom. It is an incredibly rare material, and the armor made of it will be able to block the fatal blow that will be dealt to Pan. Penny in the library. She mentions that there are high-level players fighting in the dark forest, but there is a way to get through this location without getting hurt. A girl finds the right page in a book. That's it. That is how she will bring the Tears of Ernest Chamom to Chow and repay him the debt. At the training ground, something distracts Chow. It's the maids. They are looking for Penny because they haven't seen her since lunch. Tears well up in women's eyes. The green-haired girl was scared that she had gone to the dark forest, since she had told Penny about Ernest's tears earlier this afternoon. She might want to take the flower as a reward. The shocked boy grits his teeth. Fear creeps into his eyes. He quickly leaves the playground while his friends try to stop him. Darkness is coming over the forest. A nervous Chow stands in the middle of the trees, calling out to Penny. He worries that it may already be too late. He looks behind the bush in search of a girl and freezes. The burning red eyes of a huge monster stare at him. It is a level 6 lion monster with a scale on its tail. He is extremely aggressive and will not allow anyone to enter his territory. Chow horrified. If only Penny met him. Suddenly, he notices that a small leather glove is lying near the monster's claws. A veil of horror falls on the boy's eyes. With one swing of his sword, he cuts through the monster's body. Desperate, he grabs the glove and squeezes it. Chow shakes, clenching his teeth, and stares into the void. Suddenly, he hears a voice. Shockingly, he turns his head at the sound to find Penny sitting there, her face in the dirt, and she herself is hunched over, clutching her head with her hand. He calls out to her, and she smiles happily to see her brother. Chow rushes to her, and grabbing her by the shoulders, sternly asks why she came here. Desperation appears on his face. He was afraid that she had already died. Chow needed. She asks him not to be angry with her, and leans into him. The guy silently presses her to him with all his might. At this moment, the girl has a strange feeling, as if she is not being held by the cold Xiaoluno, but by someone else. He was afraid that he would lose her. His sister. The mother asked the doctor what happened to Penny. Chow told her that she encountered a level 6 monster in the forest. But the doctor says that on her body there are only small scratches from the branches and bruises. She must have been lucky. Penny is sleeping on the bed. Chow, who was sitting nearby on a chair, fell asleep and laid his head next to his sister. It seems that he was watching over her. The mother asks the doctor to let her know if anything happens, and they both leave the room. Penny wakes up and looks at her brother. The bet was lucky. Even if the level of the monster guarding the flower is high, you can use the paralyzing potion and get a break of 3 seconds. Thus, the monster model hangs in the game. An error occurs. Fortunately, this bug also exists in this world. If she wins sympathy, then she will meet with the developers of the game, and she will be able to return. Penny strokes her brother's hair. She knows that when her mother dies, her character will never be the same again. But maybe she can live with Chow in harmony, like a normal brother and sister. She looks at the sleeping brother with a tender look and asks to wait a little longer. Soon she will return her former sister to him. A luxurious carriage pulls up to the high temple. Penny gets out of it. She, as a citizen of the kingdom, arrived in the province where the worship of aristocrats takes place. The girl is glad that she was able to get Xiaoluno to bring her here, but in order to make her way to the main hall of the temple, she needs to get rid of the guard, a man with short gray hair. She says she needs to go to the bathroom, and the man lets her go, asking her to come back as soon as possible. She really needs to get back before her brother finds out about this prank. But suddenly, the girl is stopped by a scream. An adult man is angry with the child for stepping on his shoe. He pushes her. There is outrage among the people. They loathe her.
The little girl with purple hair is saying that she accidentally stepped on his foot. People whisper, Victor Tinker is known for his caution. What will he do? Beat her with a whip, make her lady on the show.
The man becomes enraged and swings his hand at the child. Suddenly, Penny rushes to hug her, asking how long she's been looking for her sister. She apologizes to Victor from the Gladstone family, saying that this is her relative who lived abroad for a long time. Victor is horrified and asks if this is the same cruel Gladstone family. The girl agrees and says that she can ask her brother and father to apologize to him. The frightened man refuses and quickly leaves. The girl thanks and asks Penny her name. She reaches for her shoulder with her wounded hand, accidentally soiling her clothes, and sullenly apologizes. Penny smiles sincerely and puts a bandage on her arm, but she needs to run. She tells the girl that she will see her next time and leaves. The girl looks after her enthusiastically. Suddenly, her mother calls her, saying that she should not be here. But the girl with purple hair, Claire, does not move. She is frozen in place. With delight in her eyes, the girl replies that she just met an angel, looking again in the direction of Penny, who is gradually moving away. Penny tries to climb a ledge to get into the temple, but accidentally kicks someone's head. It's a guy with blue hair. He doesn't look evil. Instead, he grabs the girl and pulls her into his arms, saying that she looks like a kitten. This is Dylan Hill. Penny shakes. The only crown prince of the Kanban Empire Lang. He owns a thunderbolt, is an official, and one of the chosen. In fact, he is the leader of a secret revolutionary organization, and fights with the nobility for the rights of ordinary people. He worked with a smart and tough character, and felt attached to her. Penny is confused. This character didn't even appear in the game. How did it happen? He is called. Penny gets up from his lap. She is embarrassed, bends down, and apologizes to him for her rudeness. Dylan grabs her hand and brings it to his face. Kissing Penny's hand, he says he hopes this isn't the last time they meet. The girl blushes when he smiles at her and leaves.
The servant asks the boy who he was talking to. He smiles, saying,
The girl blushes in embarrassment, thinking how handsome he is. He is definitely worthy of the title of King's Majesty. Penny winds her hair around her finger. Her character might like him, she muses. The girl remembers the moments when they met in the game. In her imagination, a shot appears when an adult Dylan is standing in the palace, and next to him is a girl with purple hair, the main character of the story. Penny looks down at them over the heads of the crowd, her hand clenched into a fist. They are in white clothes, getting married. The girl slaps herself on the cheeks, exclaiming that she needs to find a way out of here. The guard returns to the noise from the bushes. He grabs Penny, asking what she's doing in the restricted area. But here, a girl of divine beauty appears before her eyes, with long white hair and amber eyes. A white dress with a gold ribbon flutters behind her like wings, forming a radiant aura. The guard next to her immediately bows, calling her a saint. The girl says that Penny is her guest, and that he should not embarrass her. The man apologizes and runs off to guard the gate. So Penny ends up in the temple. Exquisite, expensive decoration decorates the walls, and in the very center, an icon of a girl with long white hair and flowers in her hands. The girl makes a guilty face and apologizes. Suddenly, she falls to her knees in front of Penny, calling her big brother, and begins to beg for her forgiveness. Penny looks at the girl in confusion. She gets angry and demands to be let go, but the girl clings to her leg with her hands and asks to be heard. Eventually, she wipes a tear from her face and gets up. This is how Penny manages to see the girl again. Amber eyes are combined with gold jewelry. Small lily flowers are carefully scattered on her head, shading the cold, white-blue color of her hair. The ears are down, like a mythical creature. The girl thinks about the women on the game development team and admits that this one is actually very attractive. With burning eyes, she comes to the conclusion that it must be Mrs. Miwa Nozomi, but the girl denies. She turns out to be a man from the development team, Jing-san. With a proud face, he explains that he had long begged Yusi to draw such a character for him. He continues to be proud of his appearance in the game when he says that girls with big breasts are the best when Penny comes up behind and tries to choke him white. Tape. With an angry face, she threatens to kill him if he doesn't shut up. Suddenly, clarity returns to the girl's eyes. She stops and hastily apologizes, confusedly explaining that she is overcome with rage when she hears the word developer, and the urge to kill appears. Overwhelmed with fear, the boy listens to her explanation in silence. Finally, Penny looms over him, her face menacing. She asks what kind of situation it is and what will happen next. Horrified even more, the developer shrinks back and hastily assures her that he will explain everything. After several hours of explaining, Penny concludes that she was given a single confidential beta to expand the market for holographic VR games, but there was a glitch in the development process. Guilty, the developer repeats. Due to lost time during the summer holidays, all developers had to work overtime for more than 3 months, but the payment of overtime bonuses was delayed until the application was submitted. Due to this, programmers penetrated the hosting of game servers. At the same moment, the girl suddenly joined the game at the moment when she turned into the way she is now, like a magical reality. A blue aura from computer calculations and systems appears around the character with blue hair. The developer explains, "They are not sure of the specific reasons, but they know one thing for sure. He draws red elements in the scheme. This game world has become uncontrollable. A portal has appeared in it, into which she accidentally got into." Playing with the red flickers in the schematic, the man explains that such things cannot just happen in the game space, and asks if the girl was making a wish to the system when she received the invite code. Penny looks confused. Blue schemes circle around her, turning into red. She grabs her head. She can't remember. The boy is surprised by this answer. She explains, since entering the game world, she has lost all her memories, but she still has her common sense and her experience in the game as a modern person. However, her memories of who she was and what kind of relationships she had with those around her have disappeared. The guy looks pensive. A shadow of sadness creeps over his face. After a silence, he speaks his theory. This world was created just for her, and if she loses her memories of her past life here in the game, there will be only one opportunity to remember. And this is a memory that she does not want to think about, but which continues to bother her all the time. The developer promises that he will look for a way to release the girl from the game until he finds one. Until then, let her take care of herself. He shows the holographic graphics of the game. The second half of the game will not pass without her. Penny is annoyed. The girl reaches out her hand and confidently demands that he give her divine power as she wants to save someone. The developer asks if this is a game character. Penny, coming together, explains that although for him the characters are just a set of ready-made data, for her, their warm embrace and unintentional feelings have become too real. When she appeared in this world, she did not want anyone to die before her eyes. With confidence in her face, she presses her fist to her chest and continues. She wants to help them, no matter what it costs her. The developer looks at her for a few seconds, and a smile appears on his face. With a warm look, he asks her to follow him. Penny finds herself in a hall with high dome-shaped ceilings and large windows that let in warm sunlight. The developer takes her to the center and puts her on his lap. Penny folds her hands in prayer as the boy holds a glowing sphere above her head with angelic wings folded around it. The hall is dazzled by a white glow. They both read a prayer in which they swear before the god Ernest. The girl tries to feel his presence and become his right hand to cope with all the adventures. And then, she will be loved by everyone. The prince stops abruptly and turns around as if electrocuted. He feels power, as if from an oracle, and orders everyone to turn towards the temple. When the girl opens her eyes, she finds herself alone in the middle of the temple, surrounded by the yellow, warm light of the temple. She is happy because now she can rely on herself. Unexpectedly, the prince appears behind her, scaring Penny. He presses his hand to her chin with interest and examines the girl, saying that he immediately ran here as soon as he felt that a real daughter from God was born. He smiles. It turned out to be a kitten. The guy presses his hand to his heart. He prayed for them to meet again, and it seems God Ernest did hear his plea, which is why he's here. The girl looks at him silently, fascinated. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out to Penny, which makes her shudder and startle. This is her brother. Together with the servants, he looks in amazement at the scene unfolding before him. Prince Dylan turns to him first, giving him a warm look. He concludes, "A boy from the Gladson family." Chow humbly bows his head before him, calling Your Majesty. Chiao gives the girl an annoyed look that scolds her for going out to do something alone again. Penny cringes beneath him and mentally apologizes. With a displeased look on his face, Chow walks closer, grabs Penny's hand, and apologizes to the prince for being rude, explaining that he has to pick up his sister. The girl next to her laughs awkwardly. Unexpectedly, Dylan also gently takes her hand, not letting her go. He smiles gently at her and asks her to listen to what he wants to say. The girl looks at him enthusiastically. The prince leans down and kisses her hand. He asks her to become the future queen of the empire. Penny flinches in surprise. Penny stares at his face in silence. A clear feeling covers her. He is lying to her. She feels it, although she has lost her memories of it, because she was good at reading people in her past life. Dylan's words are nice, but his eyes don't reflect his smile. It feels like he proposed to her, even though he has no feelings for her, just because she is blessed with the power. The girl clenches her teeth. She remembers the prince gently holding the purple-haired girl's hand and pulling her close in a dance while Penny watches them from the shadows. Yes, he will leave her, just like he did in the game. Rage seizes her. Penny's brother comes to the rescue just in time. He pulls her away from the boy and says that his sister is too young to marry, and asks the prince to stop joking. On the other hand, Penny's left arm is once again being pulled by the prince like a rope, causing her to lean towards him in confusion. With a sweet face, he says that he did not ask for Gladson's opinion. Grabbing Penny's hands, the boys look at each other defiantly. Lightning runs between them. Chow argues that she doesn't want that, and Dylan says that even though he's her older brother, he doesn't have the right to decide for her. Finally, both lean towards her, the brother with an annoyed face and the prince with a sickly sweet smile. Both ask her opinion. Instead of thinking about it, Penny is angry about the situation she finds herself in. Both men hold her left and right hands, respectively, holding her to their chests, and due to the large difference in height, actually lift the girl off the ground, forcing her to hang like this. But they don't pay attention to it, too engrossed in their confrontation. In the end, the girl can't stand it and asks why they lifted her up, since her feet can't reach the ground. She wonders how it could have turned out like this. The game was supposed to feature a passionate fight between these two guys for the main character of the game, a girl with purple hair. Penny recalls a similar scene where they both hold the girl's hands. She just looked pretty, not like Penny. She compares herself to a piglet being pulled out of the water during a flood, dramatically shedding tears. In her mind, she begs them to deal with this embarrassing situation as soon as possible. As if hearing her request, The boys give her an uninterested look and face each other again in a silent duel. They begin to pull her hard, each toward them, as if in a game of tightrope, until Penny almost screams in alarm that she didn't mean it. With an indifferent face, the prince offers a way out, to decide which of them is the winner through a competition. Exasperated, Chow agrees and brings up the idea of sword fencing. Both let go of a surprised Penny. They seem to have lost interest in her altogether. Dylan objects. The weapon is too dangerous, and the lady should not witness the bloody scenes. Instead, he suggests another option. Play cards, much to Penny's surprise. Camus cards. Rumor has it that this game was created by the goddesses Ernest and Alton during their vacations in heaven. It was brought to the empire by the saints, and it quickly gained popularity throughout the state. Now everyone knows anything about her, both the king and the 3-year-old child. The guy with the red hair is thinking. The decisions that will be made through the Camus cards will be witnessed by the goddesses themselves, so this is the most suitable option for their duel. In the end, he agrees. The prince, holding 6 golden cards in his hands, explains the rules with a smile. There are a total of 53 Camus cards, and one of them is the goddess of darkness, Altina. Cards are dealt to both sides in a certain order. Players play cards that create a pair. The first player takes a card from the second player's pile, and if it forms a pair with the first player's cards, then he can play that pair. If not, then the second player takes a card from the pile, and so on. The first player to play all their cards is the winner. Penny, after hearing the rules, thinks for a few seconds, and then is shocked. It is an ordinary card game, Queen of Spades. Finally, the game begins. They are joined by the servants of each side, who look at each other defiantly. The prince watches Chow's annoyed face with a smile. The presenter announces the beginning of the Camus game. Penny still hasn't left. She points at her in shock and asks if she was going to say the Queen of Spades match. The presenter embarrassedly says that, in fact, this was the first name of the Camus cards that were distributed by the holiday. But the prince thought that it sounded too rough, so by order of His Majesty, the name was changed to Maps of Camus. Penny takes it out of herself. Although Penny is a thief in the game, she is still a daughter in the Gladstone family. And so, her marriage will be decided by an ordinary game of Queen of Spades? This is bullying. Meanwhile, the prince and his brother had already taken their seats across from each other at the table. Dylan decides to take the card first. Penny is happy. Her brother is usually unemotional, so it will be difficult to read his mood from his behavior. This is a big advantage. The prince reaches for the map of Altina, the goddess of darkness. Giorno is visibly happy. Dylan immediately decides to change the choice, and Chow falls flat on his face. Penny is confused. Is he really that easy to read? The guy draws 5 of diamonds and is glad that he didn't draw Altina. Giorno is immediately depressed. In her mind, Penny is already taking all her rage out on her brother and yelling at him to stop showing his emotions so obviously, or he'll be easy to read. She immediately decides that she needs to do something. She leans into her brother's ear and whispers that he will definitely win. She uses all her charm, smile, and big shining eyes. This immediately motivates Chow. His eyes light up, ready for battle. Behind him, Penny continues to support him. The girl is happy. While he is so happy, the prince will definitely not be able to read his mood. A minute later, the host announces that His Majesty Dylan has won the match. Chow slumps face down on the table. He is completely broken. He has only one card left in his hand. The goddess of darkness, Altina. Penny is indignant at how this happened. For some time, Giorno continued to draw only the white card of Altina. She looks at the puzzled faces of the servants behind the prince and realizes he just kept drawing the middle card. Prince Happy gets up from the table, ready to make the bet, but Penny stops him. She explains to a surprised Dylan that according to the law of the goddess, everyone should make a decision about marriage independently. Therefore, even though her brother lost, no one can ignore her wishes. She takes off her white glove and throws it on the table in front of the prince, calls for a fight, and offers to play another game. She decides that this time she will compete alone. The prince's slight surprise turns into a gentle smile. He accepts the challenge. Penny sits down at the table with a menacing expression. Although she is not a professional, she will not show her emotions as easily as Chow. The prince reaches for the map of the goddess of darkness. A wide smile appears on Penny's face, her eyes light up with stars, and her whole appearance begs him to take this card. The presenter announces, His Majesty Dylan won the match. The prince laughs in his mind. They are both really family, so similar, and both of them can't hide their emotions at all. Broken Penny sits opposite him, next to the same Chow. Even the servants of both sides look puzzled by the situation. Finally, the prince approaches a dejected Penny, struggling to accept defeat, offers his hand, and offers to come with him. Now that he has her consent, the next thing he plans to do is meet each other's parents. He smiles widely, radiating affection. Penny shuddered, and Chow next to her seemed to become even more slumped. Two carriages are driving along the road. Dylan and Penny were already left in one of them. Chow was put in another. The girl is visibly nervous, trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. Instead, the prince looks at her with a calm smile. She folds her hands in prayer, but worriedly asks if the prince is sure of his decision, and if he needs more time to think. After all, they just met. But the prince good-naturedly replies that this is not a problem at all, since among the aristocracy partners rarely see each other before the wedding, so there is no need to worry about it. Penny tries to convince him again, saying she's too young, but the prince immediately rejects it, saying that you can only get engaged first. The girl adds that she will still need to get permission from her parents, which is so difficult. The prince laughs, asking if they are not going right now to them, to Gladstone Palace. In the end, the girl can't stand it. She shouts that she doesn't like the guy at all, clutching the hem of the dress on her knees with her palms. An awkward silence falls between them for a few seconds. The girl waves her hands worriedly and apologizes, trying to find the right words. The guy gives her an indifferent look and asks what does it matter. The girl freezes in surprise. The prince waves his hand boredly and says that she did not understand the meaning of their marriage at all. A person who is blessed by God appears in the empire every 20 years. Yes, it is endowed with holy power. It gives hope to the people of the state thanks to them. This is why holy powers are so different from any other form of magic. They can be used anywhere. Even if such power falls into the hands of other empires, it will not be able to be used for its intended purpose. This power will bring tragedy and misfortune to the inhabitants of that state. Thus, marriage with one of God's blessed ones is only a way to maintain stability. Dylan finishes explaining when the horses carrying the carriage reach the palace walls. In fact, the essence of this marriage, to ensure the strength of peaceful life and stability for the empire, and it has nothing to do with whether they are both in love or not. With a worried face, Penny listens to his words. The carriage pulls into the shadows, so everything around them goes dark. The prince says that he can give her some time to think about this fact and accept it, but he hopes that the girl understands what he means. Darkness covers his face as, with a sad, stern look, he says that the empire will not allow anything to disturb its stability and harmony. When the sunlight again enters the windows of the carriage, the boy's face immediately changes. With a gentle smile, he says that Penny's normal life will be taken care of with the utmost care, so she needn't worry at all. Kindly, he asks if everything is okay, as the girl looks pale. Penny frowns and looks at him dejectedly. The prince smiles an evil smile. His red eyes seem devilish in the dark. He says that usually a gloomy atmosphere like this usually makes people depressed. Penny clutches the dress in her lap again. She understands that this person in front of him is not at all like the prince she knew. Two carriages are already standing in front of the golden gates of the palace. The girl thinks that, although in the game, Dylan could sometimes be strict with Claire, but in most cases he was always very gentle and attentive. The prince gives her his hand, and thanks. Penny gets out of the carriage dejectedly. The girl notices her brother from the side, who looks back in their direction. The prince smiles teasingly at him. She understands that Dylan's words were a threat to her, and if she refuses him, she will most likely die early, and even involve other people in all this. Penny looks timidly at the prince. And what should she do now? The three of them go to the palace through a wide road in the middle of the square. Chow is ahead, leading her. Dylan says he's actually known the Duke for 2 years, but this is his first visit to his palace. Penny is surprised that he knows his father. In fact, even she hasn't met him yet. The prince smiles genuinely, saying that her father is actually his mentor in a way, and he always heard from him that Mrs. Gladstone is a very elegant and beautiful woman. He hoped it wasn't too rude of him to arrive so suddenly. Chow calls out to her mother when she sees her ahead. She looks surprised to meet them. She is holding a shovel in her hands, which does not match her long green dress, and is digging something in the ground. Nearby, a dejected servant holds a tray. Penny clutches her head, sobbing. She tries to eat a spoonful of a dirty-colored liquid that emits an ominous dark aura. The girl shouts that it smells terrible and tastes even worse. Chow is angry and tells her not to waste the food. He turns to his mother, asking if she was going to bury this dish while they were gone. The family is sitting at the table. The depressed mother is trying to drink the liquid, and the embarrassed maid is pouring another plate of food from the pot.
The woman tries to make an excuse and says that she is just clumsy, to which the guy immediately stops her. Then why did she try to knowing how clumsy she is?
The mother with tears in her eyes grunts that today she drank tea at the countess's house, and all the women proudly told what they were making for their children. Scarves, goodies, jewelry. It all looked so happy and harmonious. That's why she also wanted it. She wipes her tears with a handkerchief, explaining that Giorno doesn't come home very often, so she wanted to show him her motherly love. At this, the boy pushes away the plate with dangerous food, saying that it is better not to cook for them. It is the best manifestation of motherly love. The woman gets upset and says that her son just doesn't love her anymore. This scene is watched silently by Penny with the prince. The girl asks him what he thinks about the elegant and beautiful Mrs. Gladstone, about whom their father told him after they met. Dylan, being nervous, is covered in sweat. The guy turns to the girl and only smiled warmly at her, as if responding to a joke. Penny understood. He smiled just to avoid answering it. She says to herself that this is very hypocritical. The girl is called by her mother. She immediately turns to her with a wide, beaming smile, asking what the matter is. The prince looks at her annoyingly from behind, as if to say that she is the same hypocrite. The mother gently smiles and pats Dylan on the head. She didn't recognize him, but thought Penny had brought her friend. Calling him cute, she asked what his name was. Prince introduced himself. He is Dylan Devonshire. Not believing her ears, the woman freezes for a moment, and with a trembling voice asks if it is really him. Dylan greets her again. Penny gets into an awkward situation when she decides she's had enough and says it's a prince. The mother froze in place. Her soul seemed to fly out of her. She just called the prince cute and patted him on the head like a puppy. Penny anxiously tries to explain the situation, waving her hands. They met at a holiday, but became such good friends that they got back together. But the prince decides to get down to business right away. He smiles and bows to Penny's mother, who is sitting in front of him on a chair, puts her hand to her heart, and asks her to allow him and Penny to marry. The woman asks in surprise. Chow behind is getting annoyed again, but looks away from them. Dylan confirms the words about the marriage and takes a surprised Penny by the hand, pressing it to him, as if in a dance. He says that they will be the most perfect couple that the goddess of fate herself created. The mother shuddered in alarm at this. She tries to smile calmly, but says that the two of them are still too young for marriage, and they can only talk about it when they are older. Penny happily hides behind her mother, sticking her tongue out at the prince. In her mind, she praises her mother, and also asks her to turn the pot with that inedible mixture over his head. But the prince does not back down. With a gracious smile, he asks to trust him, and says that it will be the happiest and most successful marriage in the empire. He explains that Penny just accepted the divine will and received divine power. Therefore, if she enters the imperial family, her power can be used to its full potential. Mother's head is dizzy from the amount of information. But Dylan continues. It will also be very useful for diplomacy. He has developed a political plan for the next 10 years, and he can tell it. Finally, the mother can't stand it anymore and tells him to shut up, knocking over a pot and a chair. She tries to hit him, rehearsing that she doesn't understand a word, and if she says no, that means no. Dylan calmly and easily dodges the shocks. He freezes in place and asks her to stop and calm down.
The guy gives her a serious look ridiculously sparkling here with a red fire and tells her to explain what exactly she doesn't understand.
The pot, which flew into the air, descends and falls with a crash directly on the prince's head. The green contents begin to slowly run down the boy's hair and face. Everyone around is scared. Mother and Penny press their hands to their faces, and even Chow looks excited. They call His Majesty. The boy's face turned black with anger. He stands in silence as an ominous black spirit engulfs the cauldron and a green liquid drips from his chin. He catches a drop with his finger and brings it to his mouth, tasting it. After a few seconds of silence, he says that it tastes terrible. It is already evening outside. Dusk covers the palace, and only the light window and the yellow moon stand out against the dark blue sky. A worried voice comes from the window, saying that it was very scary, and she thought royalty would come to punish them. Penny holds the cup in her hand and reassures her mother that everything is fine. He didn't look angry. They recall that immediately after the incident, Dylan smiled cheerfully at them, removing the pan from his head, and asked them to use the bathroom since he would not be able to return in this form. But this worries the girl a little. In fact, such a genuine lack of rage makes him even more terrifying. Out of the blue, the mother asks why the prince proposed to her so suddenly. The girl hesitates awkwardly from this question. Mother folds her arms in preparation for gossip, and with a slight blush on her cheeks and a big smile, asks Penny if she likes him. Penny, with the same smile, laughs awkwardly and asks her not to talk about it now. But in her mind she screams, how could she like someone like him? She decides to talk to him when she gets the chance. Penny's voice turns serious. She puts a cup of tea in a saucer with a golden ornament and says that something else is more important now. The girl casts a confident look at the woman and says that she wants to see if her divine power can cure her mother's illness. Her mother is immediately taken aback, but reassures her that she's fine and she doesn't need to try so hard. But the girl rushes into the arms of her surprised mother, but denies it. She looks at her with big eyes, and in a pleading voice asks her to at least try to do it. The woman's eyes widen, stunned. Whether it's such a mature behavior for a 10-year-old Penny, or her stubbornness, as if she knows something, Mother smiles reassuringly, but furrows her brows, pleading not to be in such a hurry as Penny stubbornly and confidently pulls her hand to place her on the bed. She frowns. A few minutes later, the mother is already lying in bed, and Penny is standing next to her, holding her hand, and warns her in a grown-up way that she is going to start trying to heal. The woman tries to translate it into a more playful setting, so she mischievously calls her a little doctor. Penny squeezes her mother's palm in her hands and leans it against her forehead. In an instant, a warm, yellow light erupts from her hands, illuminating the girl's focused face and begins to spiral around them. Yellow lightning gradually disappears. Penny slowly opens her eyes and asks her mother how she is feeling. The woman with closed eyes thinks for a second, then puts her other hand to her chest with a smile, saying that it is very pleasant, and she feels her body relax. She tries to open her eyes, but the lids are too heavy. The mother says that she suddenly felt a little sleepy. Penny says it's fine, and she can sleep because she's going to stay with her. It's almost morning on the clock. The twilight covering the room gradually turns into morning, white light. Penny is still sitting next to the bed, holding her mother's hand. She continues to fill her with a yellow, warm glow, until she begins to feel short of breath. Penny feels that the disease does not want to go away, and she is almost at the edge of her capabilities. Her face is red, her eyes look tired. She healed her all night. Suddenly, a ball of purple, dark magic appears from the mother's chest. Some symbols emerge from it, spinning in the shape of a cross around the sleeping woman. Shocked, Penny lets go of her hand and walks away. She struggles to make out the purple symbols in astonishment until they whirl her aside onto the furniture. The girl covers herself with her hands, trying to protect herself. Suddenly, everything stops. She widens her eyes in surprise and looks at her hands. Her fingers are covered with black, like soot from a fire. But she opens her hands. It's not ash. Black pieces fly from her hands like dark magic and fill the room. The girl, enraged, clenches her teeth and clenches her hands into fists. She curses, but looks down, depressed, frightened. After a few minutes, she understands that there is nothing surprising in the fact that the best doctors and healers cannot cure her illness. Penny glares at her mother, who is now lying unconscious in bed, asleep. They all just come from the wrong side. In fact, this is not a disease. With a shocked look, she clenches her teeth again and looks at her mother. This is a curse. In a dream, The mother begins to twist and turn. She has a tired expression on her face and red cheeks. She is breathing hard and clutches the blanket in her fists. Probably fever. Penny wonders who put such a terrible curse on her. She would never be able to defeat him with her current strength. The girl looks worriedly at her mother and begins to say that she has something to tell her. But she is interrupted by loud footsteps. It is Chow. Why did he come at this particular time? Unceremoniously, the boy opens the large golden door, warning that he is entering. Penny is alarmed. The corrosion on her hands isn't going away anytime soon. And how will she explain all this to him? The guy enters the room and examines it. His eyes are drawn to the windows. They are open. Why does she sleep with the windows open? Penny tries to hide, but her slippers are too loud on the floor. Chow immediately turns to the noise, aggressively asking who is there. Penny hides on a wide loggia with tea tables, somewhere behind the leaves. She presses her black hand to her chest, but realizes that she cannot tell him all about it now. Penny grits her teeth in anger. Mom, who suddenly felt worse, her hands covered with traces of black erosion, as if from the use of dark magic. Is this the reason why in the game Penny did not accept and understand her brother? The guy, raging, continues to rush around the corners and asks who is there. He approaches the open loggia where Penny is hiding. The girl cowers fearfully, but narrows her eyes. She considers whether she should take a risk, hiding behind the leaves of a tree. Chow walks out onto the large balcony. It's still dark in the early colors of the gray sky, but it's starting to lighten. The light of the room from the open door is the only thing that illuminates the boy's gaze. He thinks for a second whether he has given up. Perhaps his instincts have become too sensual. Meanwhile, Penny, already far behind the loggia, she has descended the tree below and is now hanging meters above the ground, holding onto the trunk of the tree with her hands. She found herself right in front of the bright, open window, breathing hard and shaking. It was getting harder and harder for her childish hands to hold her whole body. The yellow light from the window illuminates the girl's face, and Penny immediately tenses up and is shocked to see it. That's what it means. As one misfortune goes, another follows with it, the girl thinks with horror. Right in front of her eyes is a large bathroom where Dylan is lying. His wet hair falls on his shoulders, envelops his body, and hides somewhere in the blue water. As if feeling something, he turns his head to the window and opens his eyes in shock. He sees Penny desperately holding on to the trunk, hanging above the ground, and blushing, looking straight at him. Dylan calls her name and confusedly asks what she's doing. The girl shakes. She has completely forgotten that there is a bath directly below. Penny, increasingly embarrassed, asks if he will believe her if she says she enjoys looking at the moon. But, in fact, the girl is turned directly to Dylan's window. The moon is somewhere far behind her. Rather, she enjoys the view of his bathtub. The guy gives a skeptical look in response. He asks if she is really doing it in such an awkward position. In a second, she scratches herself on the trunk in embarrassment, but still turns to the moon, saying that it is very beautiful today. She was actually lucky that the moon was at least visible today, otherwise it would have been even more awkward. Dylan mockingly says that Lady Gladstone's interest in going out in her nightgown to a tree in the morning to look at the moon is not understandable to ordinary people. The girl gets annoyed and says that it is none of his business. The guy gives her a cynical, confused look again and asks if he needs to call someone for her. The girl grimaces, but answers that not now. It's too embarrassing. But in reality, she nervously reasons that she should stay put until the marks from her hands disappear. The guy turns away from her. They stand with their backs to each other in silence until the girl decides to break the silence. She calls him by his title and asks if he can ask a question. She looks away from the moon and looks sadly at her feet dangling above the ground. Penny asks that if she is blessed with the power of God, she is not actually Gladstone's daughter. What if this is an ordinary, simple person? The silhouette of a girl with purple hair appears in her memory, the main character of the game. Would the prince force her to marry him too, using the same method? Dylan's eyes widen in surprise. After a few seconds, he skeptically asks if she thinks he's attracted to Penny's aristocratic status. Confused, the girl thinks no. It's because he didn't force Claire in the game to marry him like her. The boy picks up a pink glass and shows it to Penny. He finds her on the bathroom shelves and asks if she knows what it is. The girl replies that it is hair oil, and I think she heard that it was made from a precious spice somewhere in the East. Dylan agrees, but says that its price on the market is about 17 kopecks per bottle. He puts the bottle on the windowsill and asks if she knows how much an ordinary person spends every year. Penny, without thinking, immediately answers, 10 pennies. Dylan is significantly silent, but asks what she thinks is the reason that aristocrats can live in luxury. Is it pedigree, life experience, status from birth? Penny replies that she thinks it's just because they're lucky. While the children of the common people are busy with work, live in poverty, and are bullied by everyone around them, children born in well-to-do families, such as Dylan and her, can live rich and peaceful lives, even if they do nothing. But she never believed that aristocrats should take it for granted. Instead, they always have to pay a price when they get something. As a marriage without love is the price of being rich all your life. A picture appears in her head where she walks under the crown with Dylan, in wedding dresses, with flowers, but with sad and indifferent faces. After a few minutes of silence, Dylan asks her if it really should be called a bad relationship. They look into each other's eyes as Penny ponders the unexpected question. Suddenly, they are interrupted. A frightened maid in glasses shouts from the ground to Penny, asking what she is doing there. Meanwhile, Dylan gets out of the bath and puts on a white robe. He says that as long as it doesn't damage the Empire's reputation, he won't stop her from doing anything after they're married. The maid is already confused and begins to call out to everyone around and ask for help, saying that Penny is still on the tree. Ignoring her, the boy ties his robe and asks the girl to think carefully before giving an answer tomorrow. He puts his hand on the windowsill and looks into the girl's eyes as he says that he hopes she will make the right decision. An uncomfortable silence falls for a few minutes. Confused, Dylan asks if she's always watching other people change clothes. Penny agrees. She adds that she suddenly felt as if the prince was not so bad. He is surprised. Penny imagines a rally where representatives of the proletariat with red flags demand to stand up for the working class and abolish the 996 system. The working day starts at 9 in the morning, ends at 9 in the evening, and so on 6 days a week. Penny, with a confused look on her face, says that the whole thing is actually too scary for her, and she feels very strange. But suddenly, she felt a great relief. Dylan looks at her in surprise, the wind blowing their long hair and leaves. She says that as long as he is a stupid guy, things can still be changed. The sun is rising, and the bright blue sky is already looming behind the girl. The morning illuminates her white shirt with a green bow for sleeping. Holding on to the trunk of the tree, with a big smile, she says that there is no need to wait until tomorrow. She can answer him right now. In the end, Penny, with confidence on her face, asks to be allowed to reject the prince's marriage proposal. In the morning light, the blossom of the tree Penny is sitting on appears white. She says that she will probably refuse the marriage contract. Dylan lets out a frustrated sigh and says he understands. The girl smiles sincerely, completely carefree, as if she is not refusing right now the person who previously threatened her relatives. She tries to calm him down, but tells him not to react like that. She is not doing it to avoid all kinds of aristocratic obligations and affairs. With a blush on her cheeks, she excitedly explains that the common people are weaker than the aristocrats. The prince stares at her in shock, and Penny says she can explain it all to him. Dylan silently gives her an incredulous look, waiting for an explanation. The girl says that aristocrats live in luxury, while ordinary people work tirelessly. But at the same time, they can afford a quiet and happy life only thanks to the aristocrats themselves. With a confident look, she says that it seems to her that there is really no difference between the common people and the aristocrats. But the aristocracy considers itself stronger and therefore puts pressure on the weak people. The boy continues to look at her through the window in shock. She continues, "In fact, there are many more ways to fulfill your duty as an aristocrat, and it's not just marriage." The girl reaches out and puts her fingertips under the rays of the sun. The black erosion has already disappeared, and says that she thinks that the divine power should actually be used in the interests of the empire. But on the other hand, she is sure that the prince will be able to lend a helping hand to anyone who needs it. Dylan looks at her in surprise for a few more seconds, but after these words, A cheeky smile immediately appears on his face, and he asks if he can trust her. The girl falls silent for a few seconds, and then, smiling guiltily, admits that in fact she also needs the Emperor's power. Although right now it does not sound very true from her lips, she, nervously, waves her arms in an attempt to protect herself. Dylan looks at her, and then presses his palm to his lips and laughs loudly, uncontrollably, at her. This is probably the first time he has shown his emotions so naturally and honestly. The girl behind her sulks angrily. The guy stops laughing and looks at her with a cheerful look. He puts his hand on her chin and quietly says that Penny really turned out to be a lot more interesting than he thought. The girl angrily threatens him with her fist and asks if this means that Dylan agrees with her. Dylan suddenly approaches the girl and peers out of the window, resting his body on the windowsill. With his right hand, he supports his chin with interest and smiles sincerely at the surprised Penny, if she so wishes. Penny raises her hand as if asking permission to answer, and asks if there's anything she can do if they're allies now. The guy carefully hums and agrees. Suddenly, she approaches the prince's face and hits him on the forehead with her index finger, which causes him to flinch and slightly lean back. Venting all her irritation, she laments that Dylan is growing up to be terribly narcissistic. The guy is genuinely stunned. He presses his hand to the point of impact, his expression hurt and irritated at the same time. It certainly seems to have caught him by surprise. Hardly anyone has done this before with the heir to the empire. He irritably asks what that just was. Penny says that if he didn't want to, he should have refused earlier. The prince sulkily asks her to stop laughing at him. The girl folds her hands irritably and explains that if he learns to clearly express his thoughts and feelings, then his other side will appear. She continues to speak to the uncomprehending boy as if she knows something, and adds, "Then Dylan will definitely have a loved one." He looks at her with a blank face. Penny smiles genuinely, but makes an innocent face as her cheeks turn red. The light from the bathroom illuminates her expression, making it even softer. In the end, the girl asks him not to be in the future the way he is now. She says it with such an angelic look, as if she is giving the best compliment. The unfortunate maid is still standing below, calling out to Penny. She asks her again what she forgot on the tree. Finally, the girl decides to stop ignoring her and apologizes, saying that she will come downstairs soon. When she turns her head, Dylan is laughing uncontrollably again, either at her words or at the situation. The girl puffs out her cheeks, gets annoyed, and asks to stop making fun of her. The guy is smiling sincerely, in the rays of the morning sun, and is still rubbing the place of the impact. On delicate, fair skin, it immediately turned red and began to darken. The wind-blown hair already looks dry. They've spent a lot of time talking like this. He apologizes, but explains that this time Penny looked too serious saying all that. Dylan smiles gently, and his voice becomes more serious, as if with a hint of bitterness. He says that no one has said such words to him before. His red eyes, which used to seem evil, look sadly down somewhere. Memories flash through his head of people calling him "Your Highness" and "Your Royal Highness the Prince," saying, "You are so wonderful that there are rumors about you. You must do this. I hope you can. Keep your elegance." All these words are filled with support, but in fact, they seem to support not Dylan, but the image of the prince, the image of royal majesty, saying what he should be, putting him under the castle of this imaginary image. The boy explains that his parents and everyone around him only told him to behave as befits a royal person. He imagines himself, without emotion, in a red royal cape. The game piece of the chess king is shining somewhere in his chest, turning him into some kind of mannequin. Dylan understands. It was the first time he'd been told to speak his mind truthfully. He felt as if a mask was falling from his face. With a benevolent smile, the boy leans over to Penny and asks if she wants to hear the truth. The girl is surprised for a second, but agrees. With a serious expression on his face, he says that he doesn't really like kittens. Penny looks at him in surprise, not understanding what the boy means. Maybe she didn't remember how he stubbornly called her a kitten the first time they met, until he continues, runs his hand through her golden hair and says, "But." He releases the curls of her hair and again presses his hand under her chin, examining the girl with interest and tenderness. Green leaves swirl around the two. After all, he says that if he had to choose, The boy pauses, flirting. He would definitely go for the golden hair color of such a lovely girl. It is already late morning on the street. The blue, living sky illuminates the busy street with aristocrats, ancient buildings, people, and the prince's green carriage. Penny comes out of it, holding the maid's hand. She has already changed her nightgown into a large, elegant pink dress. Her unkempt pigtails were transformed into long golden curls that fell softly over her shoulders, and a small flower pin was visible above her ear. The prince remains in the carriage. The girl says that if he needs help, she will write all the details in a letter and send it to Dylan within a few days. He smiles benevolently and says that he understood everything. He shifts his gaze to the fragile maid with a small ponytail next to Penny, who immediately nods at him. The guy asks if it is normal that she takes only one servant with her. Penny says everything will be fine. Don't look down on that maid. To confirm her words, the woman crunches her knuckles menacingly. Penny adds with a satisfied smile that she actually has a lot of power. To demonstrate this, the maid, Nina, suddenly rushes down and, crouching down, breaks a piece of pavement. The prince, trembling, agrees. It is really big. With a gentle look, Dylan asks the girl to be careful on this trip. She gives him a cheerful wink and waves, saying that she understood everything. Thanks to last night, they seem much closer than before. Penny and the maid watch the carriage slowly drive away. A girl with an innocent, childlike face continues to wave goodbye to the prince. But as soon as the horses disappear somewhere in the distance, Penny's face instantly changes. Depression and sadness distort her delicate features. She desperately wonders if she should have kept quiet. But it's good that Dylan will at least not follow up with the clauses of their agreement. Although the probability is too small, the possibility of a connection between the royal family and the curse of her mother should not be ruled out. The girl is determined to find out more information, looking at the tall wooden building. It turns out to be a tavern. As if in a game, the girl remembers the windows around the characters that describe them. The bartender greets her kindly. Penny thinks it was a good idea to go to the tavern. When it comes to collecting information in the game, there is no better place than it. Here, for example, the youngest leader of knights in history is training with a great magician. Penny looks at them. In fact, a drunken knight with beer foam around his lips laughs loudly in the ear of a mage with long green hair and forces the annoyed girl, along with an army of supporters, to finish the drink. Next, the girl notices a bard secretly drinking in a corner of the tavern and is interested in talking to someone. His elaborate clothes, white hat, and long hair suggest that he is actually some kind of young prince. And here is a little girl who chews an apple pie. In fact, she is a witch who has lived for more than 1,000 years. Penny walks past her, and the little witch gives her an interested look. A white cat spins on the table around her, demanding a piece of pie. The girl deliberately averts her eyes, mentally telling her to keep eating. Today, she is not looking for her. The girl stops somewhere in the middle of the tavern. There is noise around. Someone somewhere is fighting. The maid glances in that direction with interest, as Penny thinks that even though this place in the game world is full of talented people, it doesn't really have a lot of trouble. In short, you can run into a lot of trouble here, the girl thinks. As if on cue, her thoughts are interrupted by her husband's loud cry. He grabs the employee of the tavern by the collar of her clothes and aggressively tells her that he wants wine, calling her deaf. A girl with purple hair tries to defend herself, holding her hands in front of her. She explains that he hasn't paid yet. Her husband interrupts her, but she shouts that it is too loud here. He looks poor in dirty clothes, dark bags under his eyes, and a small mustache over his mouth. He yells at the girl again, asking what's wrong if he blames her. Does she look down on him? In the end, he unfurls his fist and pushes the girl, causing her to fall to the floor and scream in pain. The girl, shyly cowering, presses her hand to her chest. Tears well up in her eyes, and she hastily says that she didn't mean it, and agrees with the man. Penny is surprised. It's the same girl it met that time at the temple. Why did she again mingle with a crowd of strangers? She didn't even try to change. But this time, Penny's appearance in front of her doesn't make sense, because the crowd is too dense. Well, that's good, the girl thinks. Minus one trouble. She throws a sad look at them, but mentally says goodbye to her, calling her cannon fodder. Along with her, The man from the other end of the tavern is being glared at by the great mage, the green-haired girl drinking wine, and the knight who recently shouted in her ear. However, unexpectedly, the girl calls Penny, calling her Mrs. Gladstone. She turns in surprise towards the girl sitting on her lap. She immediately jumps up and runs to her. With shining eyes, she grabs Penny's hands and holds them close to her. The girl asks if it is really her and if she is not dreaming. Her happy face fills with a blush, and her blue eyes gaze adoringly at the confused Penny. She asks in shock what is going on here. The girl lovingly presses her hand to her face, but enthusiastically murmurs that Penny always appears next to her when she is in some kind of danger. She wonders aloud whether the girl is an angel by chance, or maybe a goddess in general. Penny irritably asks not to ignore her questions. Penny is embarrassed, frowning uncertainly, and asks if the girl is too busy, because she seems to be distracting her. In response, the girl exclaims in denial that this is not true at all, and asks her to wait a moment while she solves the problems. She turns to her husband. He smiles smugly and says that maybe if she gets on her knees and begs, he'll think about forgiving her. But then his face instantly changes to fear. He screams in surprise. The blade of the knife is directed precisely between his eyes. With empty, maddened eyes, the girl leans against the table, supporting herself with her hand, and looms menacingly over her husband. In her hand is a knife, which she indifferently waves in his direction. In a mad, quiet voice, she apologizes, and tells him that now she has a very, very important person who cannot be left and who must be accepted. With wide eyes, she adds menacingly, "Could the man leave the tavern a little earlier?" The man immediately shouts an apology and begins to run to the door in embarrassment. Penny watches worriedly as he crosses the threshold. Meanwhile, the girl with the purple hair carelessly hides the knife. Penny looks back at the girl in horror, thinking how scary this is. The girl's voice immediately quiets down. She gently touches Penny's hand again and says hello, saying that she is glad to see Mrs. Gladstone again. Her face changes. Admiration burns in her blue eyes. Her cheeks are again covered with blush. She awkwardly fastens her hands in a castle, pressing them to her chest, and sighs in love, saying that, probably, their meetings were drawn by real fate. The wind blows her dress and purple hair. Tiny hearts seem to fly in the aura. Penny is visibly worried, her face turning blue. She's gone wrong again. There is a plate with a piece of pie and a cookie on the table. The girl apologizes, saying that it was she who should have treated the guest to dinner. Penny replies that it's okay. She's good. The girls are sitting in a spacious hall, similar to a dining room with many tables. There are quite a lot of people today. They form a crowd in the corners of the cafe. Penny thinks it's easy to say that until the girl picks up the knife again. Stuttering, the acquaintance calls her Mrs. Gladstone again. Penny interrupts her and cordially asks to be called by her first name only. They are the same age. The girl immediately begins to get nervous, saying that she would not dare to do such a thing. Excited, the girl wonders if it will be okay to call her by her name already on the second meeting, and what it means for them. This proposal suddenly evokes a strange fantasy in her. A blushing Penny leans over her and runs her fingers over her lips. She looks dreamily into her eyes and quietly asks if she can ask her something. The girl is immediately embarrassed, but quickly brushes off these thoughts. It won't work like that. They are still too young. In the next fantasy, she imagines herself and Penny as adults, in wedding dresses. She holds a bouquet of pink roses, and Penny leans against her back and presses his lips to her ear. She seems to whisper something pleasant to her, blushing slightly, and squeezes the girl's palm with her left hand, as if in a dance.
She thinks about the wedding. Still has to wait at least 10 years. Loudly exclaims from the section of emotions. The girl blushes dreamily, raises her hands to her face, excitedly asking if she can really call Penny by her first.
Penny is afraid of such a reaction. Did she say something strange? Then it occurs to her that she still doesn't know the name of the girl with purple hair, so she immediately asks her. The girl is surprised and immediately hurries to introduce herself. She holds the hem of the dress with her right hand and puts her left hand to her heart and bows like a true aristocrat. With shining eyes and a charming doll-like face, she announces that her name is Claire Rodriguez. Penny stares blankly at her and is stunned into silence for a few seconds. Eventually, she questions her name, thinking she misheard. The girl says again that her name is Claire. Penny falls out of space, her glassy eyes looking somewhere past the girl. She exclaims loudly and says that she has a very beautiful name. The hand with the cup of tea begins to shake mercilessly. One thing is spinning in her head. She is a corpse. Since the main character was always in the role of a replacement, on all game cards she stood either with her back to the player or her face was blurred. That's why she didn't recognize her, but she's the main character of the game. Penny clutches her head in shock. She recalls scenes from the game, Claire smiling with Chow, Dylan gently holding her hand, a man with gray hair and an eye patch holding her to his chest to protect her. The girl thinks excitedly. Of course, if you take everything like this now, it is clear why every time she met Penny, she got into a lot of unpleasant situations, but there were always people nearby who saved her. She is the main character. Getting into adventures is her main character trait. And what to do now? Penny thinks confusedly. She decides it's best to just say she has pressing business and run away. The girl puts her hands on the table and nervously begins to speak. Claire immediately interrupts her. She asks if she is okay, because the girl does not look very well. In the end, Claire shyly lowers her eyes and hides her hands behind her back. She is embarrassed, but sadly says that of course Penny is unpleasant to eat with her. She is an ordinary person from the people. Not a single trace remained on her face from the daring fantasies about the wedding. Penny immediately forgets about her plan for a quick escape. She denies the girl's sad thoughts and says that everything is fine. And in general, the dish is very tasty. In confirmation, Penny grabs a spoon and quickly shoves food into herself. Claire next to her seems to blossom, claps her hands, and says that she is very glad to hear that. The girl thinks that perhaps it is worth establishing a relationship with Claire. After all, in the game, the main character was usually surrounded by talented people. She can ask her about it. A waiter approaches them and puts a plate of fruit they ordered on the table. Claire immediately asks her husband to replace the mango on the plate with another fruit, since Penny is allergic to it. Surprised, the girl asks how she knows about this. She excitedly explains what a neighbor told her. He lives not far from here and is a student of Mr. Gladstone, Penny's older brother. The girl immediately remembers the guy who trained with Chow. Claire excitedly folds her hands in a lock on her knees, but says that she, as an ordinary citizen, still does not know why he was chosen as a knight. Penny sips her tea and explains that she remembers Helen mentioning a boy who was missing one eye and his parents couldn't afford to operate on him. Therefore, Chow made an exception and took it from a friend. In fact, it was an ordinary charity. Claire's eyes light up with hope. She puts her hands together in supplication and excitedly asks, blushing, if this means that if she loses one eye, she can also be with Mrs. Penny. Penny horrifies that Claire shouldn't say things like that, even as a joke. She nervously thinks, what is going on with her? Penny imagines a server with thousands of Claire characters in different costumes, with different hairstyles and poses. In the original game, Claire was created for the convenience of players. She is innocent, kind, brave, and educated. Do they really want Penny to believe that the girl in front of her is the same main character? As if on cue, Claire's keen eye notices a cockroach on the table. She yells at Penny to be careful and throws a knife at the ant. The blade clearly cuts him in half and sinks into the wooden table with a thud, causing Penny to flinch in fear. She looks at the stuck blade in shock and thinks, no matter what, her personality is completely different from the original one. To fill the awkward silence and distract, Penny asks why Claire suddenly wants to be her partner. The girl freezes in surprise with the knife and goes over the options in her head. She was not ready for such a question. Claire wants to say it's because she wants to learn from Claire every day, but that seems like a stupid answer. After all, she says she just wants to learn to read and write. Penny looks at her upset and remembers her monologue to Dylan last night. She then said that while the children of the common people work tirelessly, children born into rich, aristocratic families do nothing but can live in luxury and stability. Claire starts to make excuses, saying that it sounds weird, but suddenly Penny reaches up to her cheek and runs her fingers gently. As if in Claire's fantasies, Penny sympathetically softens her gaze and gently smiles at her. She leans on the table with one hand and bends down to touch the girl's face. In the end, she kindly offers her to come to the palace of the Gladstone family, and Penny will study with her and support her. The maid asks Penny if she is sure about her decision, because Mr. Chowluno will be very angry. The girl shivers. They both watch as Claire talks to the Knight Leader and the Great Mage, probably saying their goodbyes. Penny laughs guiltily and replies that she knows she can't do that. But Claire is just a kid, and if she doesn't go to school, then she has only one option: to sell alcohol in a tavern and listen to threats from drunken men in order to somehow earn a living. Penny explains that there is no way she can ignore it. With a happy face, Claire returns to Penny, probably excited about the idea of studying with her at the palace. She holds a pen and a sheet of notes in her hands, and in a moment hands them to the girl, saying that this is all she can do. Claire questions if she wants to find someone with superpowers to help Penny break the curse. Penny lets out a frustrated sigh and falls silent for a moment. She carefully looks at the sheet and asks Claire if there is such a person who could remove such a curse, which even the divine power itself cannot. Claire twirls the pen with her fingers, but honestly says she has no idea. After all, the blessing that God gives is a power that is already much stronger than any other magic. And if there is someone whose power is greater than divine, then it is worth thinking. In Penny's head there is an image of a person, illuminated by a yellow, blessed light, which is formed into symbols. Does God himself then make sense? The image of a man smashing a glass with his hand. Penny freezes in shock, as if stung by something. She clenches her fists, causing the paper still in her hands to crumple. A sudden realization washes over her. The girl screams and orders the maid to bring a pen and paper as soon as possible. A servant excitedly asks if she's okay, and somewhere in the background, Claire squeaks that she wants to study at the palace. Meanwhile, Dylan has royal business. He is sitting on a blue, elegant sofa, an advisor is standing next to him, and a grown man opposite politely explains that he heard that there is a precious stone in the empire that can purify water, called the Heart of Ernest. He smiles and folds his hands, saying that he has decided to ask the empire for help with this crisis. Just wait 1 month and the problems will be solved. After all, as a neighboring state, it must fall. The prince looks at him with a firm gaze as he ponders. Ernest's heart is indeed a very precious stone, just as the man says. But in exactly 1 month, a series of various accidents will occur, which will be impossible to spoil. In a red robe that accentuates his blood-dark eyes, Dylan looks more and more like a stern emperor. But on the other hand, he thinks, if the man is not accepted in the palace, he will be condemned by all parties. However, more importantly, the guy's intuition screams, he really doesn't like it. Dylan begins to raise the corners of his lips in a fake smile, but suddenly, he opens his eyes wide. Penny cuts into his thoughts, who haughtily says that the prince seems to have grown up in a terrible environment. He does not know how to express emotions at all. A plan comes into his head. The man calls out to him, snapping him out of his thoughts. Thoughtfully, Dylan takes a royal pose. He puts one foot on top of the other and boredly holds his chin with his hand as if demonstrating his authority. In the end, he agrees to borrow the stone. The man across from him is already exclaiming with satisfaction when the prince adds, but only on the condition that in return the sacred sword will be kept for him. The man is reeling from this offer. As if electrocuted, he almost screams as he tries to explain that such a deal is impossible, since the sacred sword is a relic of their country. It is impossible to simply give it away at will. Dylan frowns and stares at the man. He says that as long as he has the sword, in accordance with the agreement, there will be no losses. But something can go wrong. The prince skeptically asks if the man can predict accidents. In response, the man looks at him in shock and fear. He definitely did not expect a deep, solid analysis of the situation, instead of the usual soft smile. In the end, the man quickly leaves the room, slamming the large door. He mutters that he will inform His Majesty of the prince's opinion and hopes that the prince will not regret it all. A counselor nearby, with long black hair and wearing a monocular, calmly folds his hands behind his back, watching the scene. In the end, he returns to Dylan and asks if something has happened to him. His diplomatic decisions are very different from the previous ones. With a tired sigh, the prince tries to loosen the shirt collar around his neck. Challengingly, he looks up and asks if there's any problem with that. Dylan explains that sometimes an empire can face such a difficult dilemma that it can make even its enemies envy them. The man is silent, but after a few seconds, he says that the prince has changed a lot. The prince says that he actually met someone who taught him many new things. The advisor is surprised. It is rare that someone can teach something to the imperial prince's majesty. But soon a gentle smile appears on his face. He asks if it was a girl by chance. Dylan seems to have fallen in love. The boy shuddered at how quickly he was bitten. He awkwardly rubs his hand on his cheek, which is covered with blush. Dylan raises his eyebrows in confusion and almost guiltily asks not to laugh at him. An awkward conversation is interrupted by a servant. He knocks, enters through the door with an envelope in his hand, and informs that the prince has received a letter. He carefully looks at the addressee and says that it is Mrs. Gladstone. The prince immediately jumps up and abruptly gets up from the sofa. The man in the monocular watches his actions in surprise, but again gently smiles. It seems that he knows exactly who the girl is. Dylan opens the envelope with the gold seal and reads the letter carefully for a few minutes. The man next to him asks what is written in it. The prince looks up and addresses him, calling him a teacher. He asks for help informing him of all civil servants who are now in the closest reach. Today, before sunset, he needs to learn something. And this is something about Cecilia Gladstone, Penny's mother. An image of his mother in white sheets and flowers appears in his head, sleepily opening his eyes. Her long, straight hair is strewn across the bed. A large, glowing, yellow blessed seal surrounds her. Penny and Claire quietly peek out from around the corner and examine the long corridor of the palace. Everything is clean. They sneak further, time after time hiding behind the chairs, and hostilely observe the situation. Eventually, on tiptoe, they make it to the door. Penny invites her in, just very quietly. They enter a spacious room that looks like a living room, and Claire immediately begins to look at the exquisite interior in awe. Penny lets out a sigh of relief, but inside, she's glad Chow isn't here. Penny recalls how they came to Claire's parents, asking if she could spend time at the palace to study together. Both of them, as soon as they heard that she had a place to live and something to eat, immediately escorted the girl out of the house, to a better life, without asking anything else. Penny is annoyed by this because they are too frivolous. But, on the other hand, Penny thinks, looking at her tattered clothes, her family must be very lucky that she doesn't demand much from them. By the way, about this. Penny asks Claire to take off her clothes. The girl shuddered in shock and, defending herself, pressed her hands to herself. She blushes deeply and asks. Penny repeats again to take those rags off her. In the end, Penny pulls them off her herself while the girl resists, yelling that she doesn't want it and asking her to wait. After a few minutes, Claire is sitting on the bed, wearing a yellow dress with flowers and white cuffs. It looks simple, but emphasizes her delicate features. Penny rates her work very well. However, Claire is still wringing her hands nervously and bursting into tears with excitement. A blush colors her face. Confused, she says that she is not yet mentally ready. Penny ignores the meaning of her words. She smiles proudly and tightens the bow around her neck, explaining that even though it's her old clothes from last year, Claire is a bit skinnier, so the dress suits her very well. Confused, the girl asks if she is really wearing Penny's dress. Penny awkwardly fingers the red bow in her hands and again uses her innocent face to mesmerize people. She furrows her brows in a pleading and makes a charming look, and quietly, sadly, asks what's the matter. Claire doesn't like to wear other people's clothes? Claire's face immediately flares up, and she moves closer to the girl to sharply deny. It's not like that at all. She shakes slightly, her face continues to redden, and her eyes look confused. The girl shyly considers that she is wearing the clothes that Penny once wore. In her imagination, Penny is looming, who with a happy smile hugs her from the back, leaning against her with her hand. She touches Claire's hair with her other palm. The girl thinks in amazement, isn't this the same as an indirect hug? She grabs the pillow excitedly. Penny watches in confusion as Claire squeals into her pillow and rolls around on the bed. Confused, she asks not to rush everything. In any case, she seems to be happy. That's the main thing, Penny decides. In the end, the girl offers to change her into another outfit. Here, Claire is standing in a soft blue dress, as if only from the library. Next, she dons some serious riding gear, complete with a topcoat and even matching armor. It looks pretty good on her, too, Penny decides. Towards the end, outfits progress and improve. In the end, Claire finds herself in an elegant dress, with a lot of small decorations: bows, flowers, a belt, a necklace. She even wears a small hat on her head and awkwardly clutches a small fan in her hand. Penny sums up, "This look is very good for some picnic together." Penny has a satisfied smile on her face, and her cheeks are red. She is joyfully excited about this work. No wonder Helen likes dressing her up so much. The girl enthusiastically thinks that it is very cute. Claire is like a doll, but Claire herself is already taking a tired breath. The girl says that she will help her put her hair up, but Claire immediately covers her hair with her hand and asks to wait in confusion. There is no need to dress her anymore. It is too embarrassing for her. She looks down and with red cheeks quietly assures that the bandage on her head will be more than enough. Penny doesn't really understand the girl's confusion, so she questions if it's true and she doesn't need help. Claire hides her face shyly. The girl smiles and says that in this case, she can choose anything she likes, and she will invite Helen, and they will choose a room for the girl. Just as she is about to leave, she opens the door wide and immediately notices Chow. He stands silently in the doorway, as if he overheard the conversation, keeping a neutral expression on his face, but at the same time, he strictly holds his hands in front of him. Penny stares at him for a few seconds, then immediately closes the door, leaving a small gap. She looks down guiltily. But Chow is faster. He manages to grab the door before it closes. Now he looks angry. The boy tries to look into the crack and angrily yells at Penny to stop resisting. It makes no sense. He already heard another voice. With furrowed brows, he opens the door and looks inside, about to say something bad, but freezes. His gaze falls on Claire, who is sitting in the back of the room, by the window, and looks at her with surprise, enchanted. Claire also turns away from the window and fixes her gaze on the tall guy. A flash passes between them. For a few seconds, they just look at each other in silence. Penny grabs her head in confusion. Her whole plan has failed. Now the main character and the commander of the knights have met. Chow and Claire continue to stare at each other in silence, frowning. There is no sudden attachment in their eyes. On the contrary, there is a coldness running through them. But Penny, panicking, watches them both. They've been staring at each other for more than 10 seconds. Did the characters fall in love at first sight, as the plot of the game suggested? Penny flinches, but steps aside in fright. Chow walks past her. But neither the expected love scene nor the quarrel with the girl takes place. The guy is indifferent. He almost doesn't pay attention to Claire, but instead looks around the room and looks into every corner. He checks if no one is hiding there. Penny watches his actions in amazement. After finishing her inspection, Chow gives Penny a menacing look from under her eyebrows and rudely asks if it's just one girl and if she didn't bring boys along. The girl shrinks under this look and, defending herself, asks why he is looking at her like that. Claire gives the voice. She ignores the guy but turns to Penny and asks who he is. Penny begins to worry. It seems that Chow was too rude and could anger her. Penny nervously tries to lighten the mood. She smiles awkwardly and says that she forgot to introduce her to each other. Claire stands in front of the boy, who folds his arms in a frown and looks her over. Penny introduces them, Chow, her brother, and Claire, the girl she wanted to make her companion. Claire seems in despair. She looks sadly at Chow with a cold, piercing gaze, but as soon as Penny says that this is her brother, her face immediately changes. She folds her arms amiably, a joyful smile appears on her face, and the murderous aura around her turns into joyful relief. Claire must have thought that the boy could be her rival for Penny's heart, but he is only a brother. However, the atmosphere around does not soften much. Chow is still drilling the girl with a careful, cold gaze, but thinks that she is already a little too strange. However, this is not such a problem. After all, she is not a boyfriend. Claire, although with a fake smile, still looks very tense. She thinks that even though he is Penny's boyfriend and relative, she still feels some kind of threat in him. but they can deal with each other. Chow and Claire think collectively and shake hands, clenching their palms tightly, as if with an unspoken threat, but do not show it. Penny watches them, confused. Penny's servant with incredible strength, Nina, was already kneeling in front of her. The girl asked her to take Claire to the guest part of the palace and prepare a room for her. Finally, the woman led the girl behind her, and Claire gave Penny one last excited look. In response, she smiled soothingly at her and waved goodbye. Relieved, the girl reasons that everything seems to have gone suspiciously well. Could serious problems be hidden behind a simple handshake? As soon as Claire is out of sight, Chow sarcastically asks Penny if she is happy now. The girl shuddered. This is definitely impossible. She turns to her brother, and he is already looking at her with an irritated look, rubbing his fists angrily. He asks threateningly if the girl didn't bring Claire just to use for selfish purposes, and didn't even ask permission for it. Penny sheepishly apologizes, but explains that everything is wrong. She met her by chance at the tavern and couldn't leave. Chow's face becomes upset and offended. He asks why she even forgot in that tavern today. After all, Chow adds in a suspicious voice, when the crown prince wanted to marry her and asked her opinion, Penny immediately, without question, turned him down. He asks if Penny is hiding something from him. The girl sadly hides her eyes from him, folds her eyebrows guiltily, and remains silent. Chow gets down on one knee and moves closer to Penny to catch her eye and better read the girl's emotions. He slumps even more, frowning as she hides her gaze, but quietly asks, does Penny really distrust her own brother so much that she can't talk about it? Penny's face immediately changes. She smiles and waves her hand reassuringly, saying that she does not distrust the boy, but to her. She falls silent, cutting off her words, her head bowed dejectedly. The fake smile disappears as the corners of her mouth slowly droop. The girl thinks for a few minutes. She is in a situation that will bring problems with her, and that is why she should turn to her family, mother or brother for help, as soon as difficulties appear. A distant memory of her family from a real, past life appears in Penny's head. An image of a woman with long hair and a boy with blue-gray hair smiling gently at her. On the other hand, her family is in the game. Her mother, who looks in her direction upset, and Chow, with his usual annoyed face. It is obvious that her past life left an instruction in her heart, not to involve the family in her problems. Penny seems to stand back to back with herself. Here she is, in the game, a little girl, and here she is, in adulthood, from the real world, with dark, long hair. She thinks that if she tells about it, it will only get worse. It seems that the girl is used to feeling like she is always a problem for her family, and it affects her decisions in this life. Finally, after a moment of silence, Penny puts a smile back on her face and apologizes, saying that it was just her problem. She guiltily assures that she won't do it again, as if she believes that she's causing trouble for everyone around her, as if she believes that Chow is asking her about this because he's angry with her, not because he's upset that she's hiding from him. The girl continues her monologue and asks if she didn't bring them any trouble right now, didn't she? Chow grabs her hand in shock and screams her name. Not out of malice, but on the contrary to stop the verbal tirade. Penny barely responds to the scream. She raises her hands and again makes her innocent, charming face with a joyful smile. In the end, the girl assures that everything is fine, and she will be able to cope with all the problems on her own. Chow gets annoyed. He tries to kill her again, but almost shouts that she is wrong. He asks her to listen to him carefully, probably trying to explain that the girl should not solve everything by herself, and in fact her problems will not burden the family, but he does not have time. One of the knights bursts into the room and shouts excitedly that something has happened. Chow interrupts, chasing the knight away, and tells him to tell him later. He has more important things to do. But the boy is frightened and grabs Chow by the waist, trying to divert his attention, and shouts almost hysterically that there is nothing more important than this. He says that Chow has received an important letter, and in the end, the boy immediately returns to the knight. His brows are still furrowed, and his hand is clasping Penny's, but his eyes are filled with wonder. The girl also looks at the knight with a guilty look. On the street, around the palace, servants, knights, advisors, workers are running in a commotion. Everyone is calling for Mr. Chow Giorno. Everyone needs something. One of them hastily explains that Earl Williams personally sent him a gift and wants him to accept it. Another advisor interrupts him and shouts that the candidates for the security service have already been gathered. They need to be checked urgently. It had been a whole day since his unpleasant conversation with Penny. The guy desperately wanted to talk to her all this time. He caught her gaze from afar and hurriedly, anxiously looked back at her, while the people around him put papers in his hands for signature and read out. After all, he devoted his full attention to the affairs of the palace. He was too busy, and that was a relief on Penny's shoulders. She smiled awkwardly, guiltily in his direction when they occasionally met their eyes, but reasoned that it was normal that she could not answer him. Penny looked down from her brother sadly. She was sure he just wanted to talk to her. But it was hard for her to say what she was thinking, and he looked so sincere. The girl dejectedly reminds herself that, after all, she is not the real Penny, she is not part of this world, and she simply cannot accept all of Chow's kindness with a calm soul. Claire pulls the girl out of her sad thoughts. She happily runs across the blooming square to the second floor and wishes Penny a good morning. Her hair is neatly tied in a bun behind her. A servant's headdress can be seen on her, and not only that, a white apron is tied on her black dress, which the girl joyfully picks up by the hem, crouching down in a light curtsy. Penny greets back, then flinches in surprise and asks why she's suddenly wearing a maid's outfit. Claire smiles brightly and asks what the problem is. Can't she help out at the palace and get paid for it? Penny is shocked and thinks, "Of course you can, but she is the main character of the game." She asks where Claire put the clothes that Penny gave her. The girl gleefully replies that she carefully put it away in the closet. Now she can imagine that Penny is next to her as she lovingly hugs her clothes. Penny angrily fights for her to wear the clothes he gave her. The girl hides her face in her hands with a confused smile. Suddenly, Claire almost falls into Penny's arms, grabs her hands, and approaches her face with a loving look. Her face turns red with excitement as she asks what Mistress Penny will be ordering her to do today. Clean up the palace? Organize an event? Maybe bark? Penny turns away with a scared look on her face and questions her about the last point. Claire moves closer and chants with joyous excitement. Penny heard everything correctly. She can bark for her, but let her say the breed of dog she likes best. Claire does not understand them at all, but will try very hard to imitate correctly, only let the girl order. Penny frantically tries to find ways to escape, hysterically thinking that something must be wrong with Claire. She mentally begs for someone to come save her, and luckily, at that moment, a maid comes over and informs Penny that His Majesty the Prince has arrived. The girl's eyes light up. She immediately breaks away from Claire, and with a happy smile turns towards the woman, shows her thumb, and rudely exclaims that she will go find him right away. The maid flinches at such a sharp display of emotion, and Claire sighs dejectedly somewhere in the background. Penny wastes no time. She waves to Claire, rushes downstairs, runs towards the entrance to the park, and finally shouts an apology to her, explaining that this is a very important, respected guest that she is obliged to receive. Claire groggily stretches her arms towards the girl and confusedly asks what kind of guest has come to Mrs. Penny's. But she doesn't answer anymore. Her trail has disappeared. The girl remains in oppressive silence, looking shocked at the place where Penny was just standing. After a few seconds, she approaches the railing. There, two maids are lovingly watching Penny and Dylan, who are already standing below. They discuss, "Is this the prince, in his own person?" One of them says that she really dreams of marrying someone from the royal family, even if just in a dream. Claire watches the scene dejectedly. Another girl scolds her and shames her, telling her to remember her age. She is already too old for the little prince. After all, the only peer of Dylan among them is Claire. The second maid exhales dreamily and agrees with her. They cover their mouths with their hands in interest to secretly gossip and ask Claire what she thinks of the Prince's Highness. She looks down with a blank face. Claire, as if considering his title, repeats again, "His Majesty." Dylan smiles gently at Penny, and she laughs happily with him in return, which of course is not missed by Claire's attentive gaze. She clenches her fingers on the white banister, watching the couple up and down. Her eyes are bloodshot, and with an emotionless expression on her face, Claire says menacingly, "He's disgusting." The wind blows her hair, adding an even more predatory look. Meanwhile, Penny happily runs up to the prince, humming with inspiration and waving her hair. She makes a charming face and folds her arms in satisfaction when she finally stops. A festive aura reigns around her. The girl playfully asks why he is taking so long. She already waited for him. Dylan echoes her happy expression, but with such a wide smile he apologizes. He found nothing. Penny freezes in shock in the same position. Her hopes shattered in the same moment. She irritably threatens him with her fists, but irritably asks why the prince came here in the first place. The smile on the boy's face does not change. With the same joyful face, he asks her not to worry. Vid opens his eyes and, pleased with himself, quietly answers that, in fact, the expression "couldn't find anything" hides very important information. The playful mood changes to something more serious. Dylan offers to talk in a more secret place. After a few minutes, they find themselves in a large garden. Penny reacts to this with surprise. Did you really need to come here? And it is not more convenient to find a room where there is no one. With a smile, the boy replies that it's because some people are going crazy with impatience. The girl confusedly asks who he is about, until they turn a corner, and Chow appears in front of her, sitting royally on a large throne, and casts a piercing look at them. The girl shuddered, grabbed the prince's clothes, and angrily began to shake him. She is furious, but asks that Chow was forgotten here. They were supposed to be allies, so why, after all, is he here? The guy defends himself and asks if Penny didn't tell him anything. He does look confused as Penny continues to taunt him. The prince explains that he was just confused. Dylan decided that Chow already knew everything and thought it would be more convenient to discuss it all together. The girl threatens him with her fist, but shouts, "Why did he suddenly decide to be so honest?" Penny frantically tries to think of a way out of the situation, until a hand touches her head. Chow comes menacingly from behind her and asks how it is that she can discuss something with Dylan that he doesn't know about. His eyes are filled with darkness, and a hand mercilessly lifts Penny off the ground. The girl bursts into tears, but is frightened and hastily explains. He did not understand everything that way. In fact, she only asked Dylan to help with the investigation, but in fact, he does not know about what happened. The prince pensively presses his hand to his chin and agrees. In the end, she is released to the ground, but it only gets worse. Both boys hover over her, covering her with a shadow, and ask her to explain what happened in the first place. In her mind, the girl is already apologizing to Penny. She will die right now. The company moved to a small tea area in the conservatory. Chow angrily leans on the table, and with angry red eyes, angrily scolds Penny for not being herself for the past few days and doing everything behind his back. Dylan seems to be amused by this situation. He puts his hands under his chin with interest and asks the boy to calm down. It is because of his enthusiasm that his sister is afraid of him. Penny watches their confrontation with excitement. Chow's face darkens, a nerve on his forehead throbbing angrily, as he angrily tells the prince not to get in. It's only their family's business, and as a foreigner, he was at a loss for words in this situation. Dylan smiles cheerfully, but replies skeptically. It's a shame that this is so, since the first person Penny turned to when she needed help is the same stranger, and points a finger at himself teasingly. Chow angrily asks what she asked him to find out about. Dylan answers, information about Mrs. Gladstone. After that, the boy's eyes widen. He jumps up with rage and questions whether he heard everything correctly. The prince is very amused by this state of affairs. He continues, but says with a satisfied face that he heard correctly. Penny did go to the stranger to find out information about her mother and hid it from her own brother. Dylan looks amused at the boy's crooked face and adds, "It seems the Gladstone family is only friendly for a pretty picture." Suddenly, his expression turns serious. He asks if it's true. Chow freezes dejectedly, an insult on his face. His hand clenches into a fist. Penny is already getting up here. She, defensively, stands next to her brother and angrily asks to stop these scathing taunts. Chow turns to her in surprise. Dylan meant when he just told her nothing was found. The prince is happily tapping his fingers on the table. He replies that there is no secret meaning in his words. There is no record of a person named Cecilia Gladstone in the population register of the empire. The girl exclaims in shock, and the boy continues. Of course, she is recorded as the wife of the Duke of Gladstone, but other than that, where she was born, in which family, any records of relatives, all this information does not exist. Chow frowns thoughtfully, but finally sits down. He says that he never really heard my mother talk about her relatives. But so what? The prince sighs, but says that his intuition tells him that everything is not so simple here. Penny folds her arms in silence, her face dark. Dylan turns to her and explains that what they need to know, only Penny can tell them. The girl raises her guilty eyes to them, and her lips purse. She looks like she's been caged. After a few seconds, Penny hangs her head in dejection. She talks about a high-level curse that her divine magic doesn't work against. The girl dejectedly clasps her hands on her knees. Her hair falls gloomily towards them in a waterfall. Even now, this curse continues to rapidly rob the mother of her remaining years of life. The corners of her eyes redden, tears roll down. She bends even more, and quietly says that she really doesn't know what to do with all this. Chow pounds on the table in annoyance, but shouts, "Why didn't she say anything about this before?" Dylan is silent. He is thinking. In the end, the prince makes his assumption that if the curse is stronger than the divine power, he has some options. He turns to Penny and asks if she has ever heard of the 4 powerful families of the empire. The girl raises her head with hope and says that she knows something. The prince explains, drawing a map with his finger. The 4 main families who pray to the 4 future gods founded the empires and have existed together and controlled each other ever since. This is the Blue Imperial family, Devon Hill, praying to the goddess of light, the Red family, Gladstone, the god of war, and the Black family, Safuya, the goddess of darkness. Chow looks down in shock, and another. The Golden family, Street Sauj, which glorifies the god of time. It is the god of time who is the patron of their family, and therefore those born in its lands do not know what a black stripe is. Their life is centered around the beautiful. People live there forever, and flowers bloom all year round. It is not divided into seasons. However, blessings are given only to those who never leave these lands. With a dark face, Dylan quietly explains, if we assume that Mrs. Gladstone was born into the Street family, then the incredible power of the curse that affects her is clear. Someone knocks over a cup of tea, and the brown liquid spills all over the white table. Penny reasons, she gave them life, while betraying the god of time. That is why she was punished by God. She imagines a young mother in a warm jacket. A woman leaves a place of constant happiness, and eternally blooming yellow flowers are covered with snow. Cecilia returns for the last time to look at her homeland and says goodbye to it. And then she allows the man with red hair, their father, to lead her through the blizzard. A deafening silence sweeps through the greenhouse. Chow pushes back the chair, quickly stands up, and heads for the exit. The girl suddenly turns to him, slipping from her seat, and asks where he has gone. Next to her is still an overturned glass, which no one has bothered to pick up. The boy rudely cuts him off with a shout. He is going to tell his father everything. Dylan, with a serious, hard look, calmly asks, does he really think their father doesn't know anything? Chow freezes, despair creeping across his face. The prince says that, since Penny was born, the Duke of Gladstone has voluntarily gone to the front, near the territory of the Street family, and now he understands why. He hoped to find a way to remove the curse. Chow clenches his hand into a fist. Penny, who was going to run after her brother, was also petrified. Dylan sits adamantly on the chair, but humbly continues. What made him come back now remains undisclosed. He lowers his voice, hiding his mouth behind his hand, and turns away. At best, their father came back because he found a way to save Cecilia. And in the worst case, his stay here is due to his desire to spend the last days of his beloved with her. Dylan asks if they're sure they want to get involved in a case where even a powerful man like their father is powerless. What if because of this, they will only lose the opportunity to spend their last days with their mother and say goodbye? Penny angrily turns to the prince and asks what he means by that. Chow next picks up. Almost in unison, They say that as long as there is even the slightest chance, they will hold on to her until the very end. The brother and sister are frowning. Their faces express one emotion: confidence. Determination burns in their eyes. They are ready to do anything for their mother. Penny firmly presses her fist to her chest, and Chow holds her back. Now they are acting together. Dylan smiles in disbelief, but relief settles over his shoulder. He looks at them tenderly and calls them stupid optimists who, for some reason, do not cause him negative emotions. Eventually, the prince approaches them and asks what their plan is. Chow, as the boss, answers. They will act depending on the situation and contact the street family if necessary. But first of all, they need to prepare for the arrival of their father. After all, they can't lose face like that. Penny raises her hand and asks why they have to hold such formal receptions every time. After all, they accept the father, not some deity. The boys suddenly turn sharply to her with genuine shock. Chow freezes with his mouth wide open. Her brother scolds her and asks how she can be completely unaware of their own father's heroic deeds. Dylan, more calmly, with a smile, adds, "They need to teach her many more things." Penny flinches in embarrassment as they grab her shoulders and screams in fear, begging them not to. Claire returns in surprise, still in her maid uniform, but now holding a basket of assorted baked goods. From a distance, the girl notices Penny and worriedly asks where she disappeared all this time. Penny waddles tiredly to Claire and replies that she shouldn't have asked any questions. She falls on the girl in a daze and buries herself in her chest. Claire exclaims in surprise at the sudden affection. The girl hangs on her and mutters offended that she only asked if it was necessary to arrange a meeting on such a huge scale. And they read their story for 2 hours about all the legends and feats, the value of which was obviously incredibly hyperbolized. She remembers. The boys, like the heroes of a play, played feats in front of her. Chiao towered over her, standing with one foot on a chair, and read. And behold, as the divine light fell upon him, he cried out. Dylan dramatically picked up, holding Penny by the shoulders. "You're finished." Chow sprang from his seat and began to run at Penny, swinging his hand as if with a sword, and then he rushed at the opponent, who was 500 meters from him, and cut off his head. The girl shuddered in fright. 500 meters? She felt dizzy. Penny snuggled tiredly against Claire, munching on a bun while she stroked her head soothingly. Penny complained again. If she hadn't known it was a story about the Duke of Gladstone, she would have decided it was about Cayman Raider. Claire asked in surprise who Cayman was. Ryder. Penny flinched in confusion. There was definitely no masked horseman superhero show in their game world. She excitedly said not to pay attention. She just had a headache and said something stupid. Penny was quick to change the subject and asked why they were pitching tents outside the palace. Claire waved her hand in the direction of the street. Everyone wants to meet the Duke. A bunch of people had already gathered there, as if at a big festival. People walked, bought wine, complained about the crowd, and looked at the merchandise tents. Penny exclaimed in surprise. Somewhere far away, children were holding a large bunch of pink flowers. They asked if they would be enough. Their hair was also decorated with wreaths of the same flowers. The boy responded with a satisfied thumbs up when they were called. The Duke was already on his way. A large crowd of people dispersed to the sides. Through them rode the cavalry. Knights in dark cloaks sat on white horses. Elsewhere, blue flags were raised above them. People admired them. The Duke rode elegantly in front. His red cape, which blended with the color of his hair, stood out. His hair, unlike his son's, was neatly styled. He seemed to be shining. His facial expression was restrained, serious. The sharp gaze of the lilac eyes sometimes turned towards the crowd, causing the crowd to roar in admiration. It seemed that the crowd really adored her father, Penny thought. Chow met him with a hand on his chest. Butlers stood on one side of him, maids on the other. He got down on one knee before his father and bowed low. In an official voice, the boy congratulated him on his return home and asked if everything was peaceful at the front. The servants, following his example, also bowed low. His father looked down on him. He ignored the greetings and briefly answered the question. Yes. Penny thought in horror that the man looked very stern. Suddenly, Something distracted his attention. With an impassioned face, he began to turn his head in search. Penny ran up to her brother in fear, who gave her an irritated look. She awkwardly bowed before her father, and blushing, greeted him. The man lowered his eyes to her in silence. After a few seconds, Penny began to get nervous. Why didn't he answer her in any way? Did she upset him? Finally, the man quietly said that the weather was fine today. The girl froze in surprise. She raised her head in confusion and looked at him questioningly. Really? That's right. Penny understood. Her father was incredibly nervous in front of her. He tried to keep his face straight and his eyebrows furrowed, but his eyes betrayed panic. His body was shaking slightly with anxiety, although he was standing firmly in front of her. After all, he met his daughter for the first time after so many years. Penny tried to remove the uncomfortable atmosphere. She politely asked her father if he was not tired from the road and suggested that he rest. The man in front of her continued to be nervous. That's how imperturbable Gladstone is. The girl thought skeptically, remembering the lecture about his legends. But this cannot be. He trembles like an aspen in front of his own daughter, whom he has not seen for a long time. Father waved his hand excitedly and asked Penny to wait. The girl entered him with interest. The man awkwardly reached into his breast pocket and silently took out a small, fluffy bunny toy that barely took up a third of his hand. He handed it to his daughter without saying a word. Surprised, Penny asked what it was, and her father stammered, explaining that it was a present for her. The girl took the rabbit. It seemed much larger in her small hands. Penny happily raised her head to her father and thanked him for the sweet gift with happy eyes and a big smile. Although his face still remained firm and emotionless, and he still did not utter a single word, creating a false aura of toughness around him, the father was over the moon with happiness. He sighed with relief. His daughter liked his gift. Winged, he went to Chow, who politely offered to see him. The Duke walked through the crowd of people, and everyone continued to bow respectfully, regardless of age or status. The wealthy grandfather in hat put his hand to his heart and thanked him sincerely that the man was trying so hard for them. Children appeared ahead, the same ones who were inspired to collect a bouquet of pink flowers. A little girl with shining eyes stepped forward and handed the man tender pink peonies. The children behind her, with matching wreaths in their hair, enthusiastically asked to accept this modest gift from them, and giggled. The Duke was surrounded by people who sincerely expressed admiration, laughed, complimented, and were simply happy to meet the legend. Embarrassed, the man hugged the bouquet closer to him. Not a single emotion flashed on his face, neither good nor bad. Only pursed lips and frightened eyes betrayed his inner panic. It seems that he has long since weaned himself from this amount of attention. Penny watched his behavior thoughtfully. In the end, she laughed happily at such an inhuman reaction of her father. He completely ceased to seem harsh to her. A white rabbit with a pink flower on its ear rose confidently in her hands. After a few minutes, there was a clatter of heels. It was Cecilia running on the second floor. Through the railing, she peered down into the hall where the Duke was standing and called out his name amiably to attract attention, and began to wave vigorously at him. Somewhere behind her, a frightened maid was following her, as if she was supposed to make sure that the woman did not get out of bed. The man raised his head to her. In a moment, the woman jumped at him from the stairs. The Duke, with a loving look, grabbed her right in the air, and Cecilia, with a happy smile, covered his face in her palms. The woman snuggled tightly into her husband's chest and, like a prayer, began to repeat how much she missed him. The Duke gently pulled her into his arms, then leaned down to place a kiss on her hair and quietly replied that he was also very sorry. The aura of love illuminated those around. Chow expertly took out 2 pairs of sunglasses from his pocket and handed one to Penny before she was blinded. The girl pulled on her glasses in confusion, but her father still spoke. Chow calmly answered that since he was born, he remembered how his father would stutter when he started to get nervous. The boy proudly folded his hands and said that in fact, his father is nervous almost all the time. Penny next to him interrupted him angrily. There is nothing to be proud of here at all. But the girl could understand. After all, it is not so easy to be convincing, especially at the front during the battle. The brother agreed, and again said in a proud voice that this was exactly how his father had decided not to talk at all. Penny indignantly repeated that there was nothing to be proud of. She tiredly rubbed the temples of her head. Now it is clear where these legends about firm, steadfast Gladstone came from. Mother smiles happily as she finally opens up to her husband and returns to chow with Penny. Her face is covered with blush. She is gently holding the Duke's hand, trying to enjoy his presence as much as possible. The man himself, with the same imperturbable face, looks grimly in their direction, but his joy is revealed by his reddened cheeks and excitement. He hugs his wife when she sublimely asks if they should all go on a trip together, if the family is finally united. Penny's eyes light up. She is excitedly about to agree when suddenly a hand stops her. It's Chow. He leans over the girl, and she, apologetically, takes care of the two of them. He comes up with an excuse, like there's going to be a swordsmanship meeting next week, and they've both already received invitations from His Majesty, so they can't go with them. The mother visibly falls in mood, depressed. Penny looks at her upset face and freezes in fear. She grabs her brother's jacket and hysterically asks what kind of experience exchange she is hearing about for the first time. The guy looks at her emotionlessly and then leans into her ear and whispers, "Street." The same place that had been their mother's homeland and home to the god who had cursed her. Penny climbs up on him excitedly and fearfully asks if he's found a way to get there yet. Chow calmly replies that His Majesty the Prince has taken care of all this. But this is suspicious. He still does not understand why he needs all this, but now they can only trust him. There is no other choice. Time is short. The mother sadly wipes away her tears and grumbles that if it is so, you won't change anything. She returns to Artie and says that they should greet His Majesty together. Herzog reminds that the main thing is not to forget the rules of etiquette in front of him. This phrase catches Penny's ear. She suddenly turns to her father with surprise. The prince told her that he has known him, the Duke of Gladstone, for many years. Isn't that right? The father looks at her in confusion and answers, "No, they had never met before." The prince is sitting on a red chair somewhere on the roof of the dome-shaped palace. Through the exquisite columns, he observes the daylight of the blue sky. In front of him, right in the center, there is a lonely table with an equally lonely cup of tea. An attendant goes up to him. He gets down on one knee and bows low to him, informing him that all the preparatory actions that the boy asked for have already been done. Dylan nods and takes a deep breath of fresh air, as if trying to calm his excitement. He opens his eyes and gazes tenderly at the horizon as he replies with a slight smile that he hopes that this time things will be different. Claire was frantically running around the palace, helping to carry tools, collect trash, put things away. Everyone around just called her and gave tasks. Work as a maid turned out to be difficult. The girl had absolutely no time to rest, especially because of the big event, the return of the head of the Gladstone family, Artie. Finally, it was time for lunch, a short break for the servants. The girl fell tiredly on the chair next to her portion and slammed her head on the table to catch her breath after work. The maids nearby smiled apologetically at them. The last 2 days have been a lot of work, and there are not enough people for it. But tomorrow everyone will go home. The girl sits down opposite the exhausted Claire and agrees that she would have died of exhaustion if she had been going at such a fast pace for a few more days. But she smiles, saying that they will all need to rest very well because there might be another big event coming up soon. Claire and the maids are surprised to ask what the event is about. The girl leans over the table to them and furtively looks around to make sure no one is eavesdropping on them, then whispers, "Wedding." The women jump on their seats in shock and dramatically grab each other's shoulders, asking who is getting married. The maid smiles contentedly, but whispers, "Who else? Of course, Mrs. Penny and His Majesty." Over Claire's face, as if she's just been punched. She opens her eyes with fear. But the girls do not notice. They continue to gossip. The maid says that she heard that Mrs. Penny will be participating in the fencing competition and that the prince will be there as well. Another maid excitedly exclaims, "I mean, it's a date!" She busily adjusts her glasses and says with reddened cheeks that this is to be expected from people who have almost entered into a marriage contract. Claire's face darkens even more. The maid corrects her that everything was not quite right. After all, last time the engagement was initiated from only one side. The woman giggled excitedly. Did Mrs. Penny's heart melt so much before such a burning thrust of the prince? They continue talking when Claire, sitting between them, abruptly stands up. She rudely says she's going to continue working and runs for the door. The maids look around at her excitedly. What else is she going to do at such a late hour? The woman looks down at Claire's plate in surprise. She hasn't even begun to eat her portion, even though she's been working so hard all day. Instead, the fork was angrily stuck into a piece of meat, from which a generous portion of sauce flowed, but the plate was broken into pieces under the dish. The maid next to her laughs. It seems that the quality of these dishes is not so good. But the woman objects. It seems that this is not the point. Eve. Dylan calmly strolls through the illuminated square next to the palace. Claire can be heard whispering somewhere behind her. She is trying to find a knife. Like in action movies, she jumps out at the prince from behind, swinging a knife. Her eyes shine with pure hatred, and the moon behind her illuminates her maid outfit. Dylan freezes in place, his face dark. In a moment, he opens his mouth and a spell pours out of him. The girl behind is enveloped in purple light like a cocoon, and the weapon is knocked out of her hands. She opens her eyes in shock, unable to do anything against it. The glow is tightly squeezed around her, and with a crash it is thrown somewhere to the side, to the foot of the palace. Dylan looks at her indifferently. Like shackles, the purple light bound her arms and legs, pressing her against the wall. She coughs hard, suffocating from the dust. Her face downcast, Claire grits her teeth angrily as she stares down at her feet. The prince disinterestedly looks at her silhouette and says alienatedly, "That's right, let the child become a murderer." Some are increasingly losing their moral principles. It seems that he decided that this was one of the usual attempts on his life. He comes closer and picks up the kitchen knife lying at Claire's feet. The guy softens his voice and asks her not to worry. He will do everything very quickly. He tells her not to make rash decisions in her next life. On his indifferent face, his eyes light up madly when he swings a knife with force at the paralyzed under the spell. Claire. Suddenly, a yellow moon appears from behind the clouds. He lights up the girl's face. She looks at Dylan with an angry look, her teeth clenched. She frowns, trying to resist to the end, even as the purple ropes roughly crush her neck. Dylan freezes. He looks at her in shock, as if he recognizes something. But as soon as he starts to speak, he is interrupted by Penny. She desperately screams Claire's name and runs towards them through the evening square. The girl runs up and defensively stands between Claire and Dylan. She turns to the boy, holds out her hand, asking him to stop. Penny angrily shouts what is going on here and what he did to Claire. The girl behind looks at her enthusiastically, but blushes. Dylan's eyes widen at the scene before him. But after a second, hysterical laughter bursts out of him. He starts laughing madly, covering his face with his hand. Penny checks him out in surprise, while Claire looks annoyed next to her, like she didn't just try to kill him. Eventually, the boy raises his head. A broad, interested smile looms on his face. He apologizes, but says there was a small mistake. A light laugh breaks out from him again. The guy asks, as if making sure if she is her friend, and offers to take her with him to exchange experiences. Penny turns to Claire confused. Dylan asks you to believe him. His mouth stretches into a devilish grin, which he tries to cover with his palm. A defiant expression appears on the face, and the eyes glow predatory red. He stretches his palm towards Claire and says that she will definitely become a very good fighter. Penny frowns in confusion and asks what it all means. Dylan teases her. Ms. Penny can't use a sword, can she? And he doesn't even have magic? The girl confusedly agrees. Claire is still kneeling behind Penny, though she's free now, bathed in the moonlight. Dylan explains, in this case, before going to the territory of the Street family, they need to find a protector for Penny who can help her if needed. Claire is still looking at the boy with angry, scared eyes, but now she is snuggling up to Penny. The girl soothingly holds her hand and strokes her shoulder, hugging her closer. The prince reasons. This person is a protector, must have enough strength, and it would be great if he was still the same age as Penny. And most importantly, This person must be faithful to her from the beginning to the very end. After all, Claire is perfect for the role. Dylan's face lights up in a smug smile. He finally turns his gaze to the girl on his lap and reaches out to her, asking what she would say to that, Claire Rodriguez. The girl raises her eyebrows in confusion and looks at the boy in surprise. Penny tenses up. She jumps out in front of Claire again in a defensive position and asks how the prince knows her full name. He smiles, but teases that he doesn't remember. Maybe he just dreamed it. But the girl does not back down. She angrily asks if he also dreamed of meeting her father. The guy, like a fox, spreads his hands and says with a satisfied smile that it is a secret. Penny gives him an irritated look. It seems that this fool is definitely not going to tell the truth. Claire is behind them, watching them in confusion. The prince again gallantly apologizes for allowing himself to hide something from Penny, but this is definitely not the time for such talk. The yellow moon is high above them. After all, he needs a little more time. He turns and takes one last satisfied look at Penny. In his mind, the prince says, "I bet this girl is strikingly different from herself in her past life." Penny, unaware of anything, keeps her hands on her sides and sends Dylan away with an irritated look. Her confident posture is illuminated by the moonlight. Finally, after a few minutes of silence, the boy disappears from sight. Now the girls are left alone. Penny awkwardly turns to Claire and apologizes. They must have scared her a lot. With a big smile, she asks not to take Dylan's words about the defender to heart. But Claire interrupts her. She loudly objects, but fervently asks to be allowed to go with her. The girl grabs Penny's hand and squeezes it gently. She softens her voice and says that she will never dare to complain and will never go against the girl. She lowers her head low. A broken expression appears on her face, as if she is about to burst into tears. Claire raises her eyebrows pleadingly and adds that she really wants to help Miss Penny, even if it's just a small thing. Penny looks at her with a gentle smile, understanding. She turns away from Claire and says disgruntled that in this case she doesn't need to be her protector or her substitute. They were simply on her side. Claire looks up at her hopefully. The girl turns and with an irritated face suggests, pointing her finger in the direction of the path along which Dylan walked. As soon as there are favorable circumstances, it will be necessary to tie up this scoundrel and in addition, beat him well. Penny in bed. She turns restlessly in different directions to the ticking of the clock. In the end, when they indicate the new ones at 2:30, the girl desperately gets up. She can't sleep. The girl examines her own room in the twilight and thinks, lately she is completely disorganized. She only does what she fusses about. And tomorrow is a trip to the territory of Street, and this will be the first location she hasn't discovered while playing the game. Penny reaches for the rabbit on the shelf her dad gave her. She gently strokes his ears, and he seems to soften under her touch. There is something embarrassing in the soul, and what to do about it? Penny turns to the rabbit, then laughs to herself in confusion, wondering what a tiny toy can do for her. Suddenly, a voice comes out of the rabbit. "Greetings." The girl freezes with her hand on the rabbit. He continues to speak, but asks for help. He seems to be stuck there. Penny grabs the pillow in fright and presses it hard against the toy, trying to suffocate it. But it doesn't work, so she turns over to the other side of the bed in confusion and grabs her head. It must be a hallucination, a nightmare, sleep paralysis, whatever. How can a rabbit talk? She was just very tired. Meanwhile, behind her, the toy starts to flash a yellow light. A girl's voice screams from the rabbit and asks not to press her so hard. Penny turns to her in fear and shakes with fear. A yellow flash illuminates the room. A girl appears next to Penny's bed. The same divine angel from the temple who is actually a man from the development team in the real world. A serious man in a uniform, like a security guard, peers out from behind her. They appear from the rabbit like the genie from the lamp. Angel immediately throws herself into Penny's arms and with a wide smile rejoices. Finally they met. She missed her so much. The girl tenses up and with an irritated face threatens with her fist. Penny angrily slaps the angel on the forehead and argues, "What are they up to? Show up like this, in the middle of the night, and scare her to death." The developer snorts his nose in frustration and replies indignantly that they have to work very long and hard in order to find an opportunity to chat with her for at least a few minutes. The girl gets even more angry and asks why they left her alone in this world for 2 months. Angel bows his head guiltily, but mutters that it's not that they didn't want to meet. She is interrupted by a man behind, whose clothes resembled those of a knight. They couldn't do it. Penny finally turns her attention to another guest. With a sharp chin and a hard gaze, he glares at the girl with golden eyes. Angel introduces the man with a satisfied smile. This is the technical manager at their corporation. His name is Jang Jan. She folds her hands and explains that since there were malfunctions in the game system, it was decided to send him with her to explain everything in detail. The man nods wordlessly, confirming her words. Jung asks Penny if there have been any strange changes in the plot lately. He pauses, then clarifies. It's more appropriate to ask if there's been anything that might not seem strange. For example, the appearance of 4 families in the plot was spontaneous, but it fits into the world, so it cannot be called something unexpected. In a strained voice, he continues. But what's really suspicious is that Claire and Dylan's behavior is very different from the original plan. This incredible attachment, hot hatred, Penny shrinks in fright and asks confusedly what he means. An angel joins the dialogue. She sits on the bed next to the girl and calmly explains. The system did not create a similar function for the characters, but they, observing the situation from the side, can clearly see the feelings of each acting hero of the game. So, sympathy shows what position the character will take in the future in relation to the main character, and what actions he will take in the future. For example, Dylan is very good at controlling his behavior and tries to adjust it to the norm that is provided by the plot of the game, so Penny may simply not notice it. But in fact, when they first met, his attitude towards the girl was very negative. Rather, he even had an aversion to Penny. But as for Claire, her sympathy for Penny was 10 times higher than the game setting provides. The angel thinks for a few seconds. In fact, now it is worship, as if before God. The girl sadly turns to Penny, but worriedly says, if this is a normal malfunction of the game system, then it is not bad at all. But it seems to her that everything is much more complicated. Penny looks at her face in alarm and confusedly asks if this could all be happening because of her. Jong immediately says no. As soon as they found out what was going on, they immediately wanted to tell her everything, but they were stopped by the sudden increased protection system inside the game. They couldn't contact her from the outside, so the technical manager spent 2 months looking for a breach in the defense. Later, they coded this rabbit and were able to throw it inside the game for a few minutes. He recalls how Penny's father spotted the tiny toy right in the grass. Penny wrings her hands in fear and desperately asks how this could have happened. A man scans the room. Someone does not want them to interfere with the game. She thoughtfully raises her hand to her face and frowns. Is it Dylan or Claire? The man immediately rejects it, but says that it is not necessarily just them. In fact, normal side characters don't have that much power to influence that. Changing the protection system may be available only if specific rights are available. This can be done, for example, by a deity. Penny's eyes open wide, realization washing over her. She cautiously answers. Therefore, the opening of the Searchdao, Street E location, is not at all accidental, since it is the closest place to the gods. Angel leans down and grabs her hand. A yellow, sacred magic begins to swirl around them, blessing Penny with all the power she can unleash. The girl looks at her with sadness, but worriedly says that even this will not be able to guarantee her safety, and Penny should be very careful. She squeezes her hand tighter, but quietly says that they don't know what might happen next. The girl clutches her head with her palm, as if feeling weak, and says that they have very little time. She asks Penny to listen to her carefully and tells her to be on the alert. The next morning, the girl leaves the palace gate. A green horse-drawn carriage is already on the road. Others are already standing next to her. Claire, as always, excitedly smiles at her. She is no longer in the clothes of a maid. Dylan smiles in her direction, and Chow, with his usual indifference, watches her. Penny stares intently at everyone, frowning. She nervously clutches the hem of the dress and realizes that one of the 3 is actually a spy. The carriage is driving through a dense forest. Penny, Chow, Claire, and Dylan look at each other suspiciously. The mysterious silence is broken by Claire's exclamation. She throws playing cards on the table, knocking down chips, and joyfully shouts that her investment in spices turned out to be profitable and brought 5,000 in profit. The girl smugly jumps onto the table, happily tapping her foot. The team is dejectedly looking at the cards in their hands. They are playing Monopoly. Xiao shakes nervously. He owes as much as 10,000, and that is why he was sold to the ship as a slave. Dylan looks at his broken face and says teasingly that it's the first time he's ever seen someone owe so much. He smiles defiantly, but calls him Sweet Gladstone, saying that he just plays terribly. Chow flinches, but shouts that it's wrong and offers everyone another batch. Claire laughs as she lays out her cards. In fact, he's never managed to win a game since the beginning. Candy wrappers and mandarin oranges are lying on the table next to the chips. Penny closes her eyes with difficulty, but tensely asks if they really need to play Monopoly right now. She puts her hands on her knees and rests on them tiredly. Dylan replies that if she doesn't like Monopoly, he has plenty of other games. He gleefully pulls out a bunch of board games somewhere and starts laying them out, showing the girl. But Penny says that's not the case at all. Dylan freezes, and everyone finally turns their attention to the girl. Chow says she looks sick, and Claire wonders if she's going to be shaken, and excitedly starts looking for water. The girl shyly waves away the attention. She says that maybe she feels that way because it is the first time she is so far from home. Penny awkwardly asks them to keep playing because she doesn't want to disturb them. Chiao casts a careful, penetrating look at her, as if looking right through her. He puts his cards on the table and quietly says that he understands her feelings, and it's okay if she's a little nervous. The girl presses her hand to her chest and hides her sad look behind her hair. Chiao continues, "But even so, it's not worth it. After all, they'd be on the road all week, and if she didn't learn to get over her excitement, they definitely wouldn't be able to reach their goal." The guy gets up, gently puts his hand on her head, and ruffles her hair. The girl opens her eyes in surprise. Chow says that you should not blame everything on yourself. Penny looks up at the boy warmly, smiles gently, and nods in relief. Chow gently runs his fingers through his curls. But the family atmosphere is interrupted. Dylan teases him, and in an enthusiastic voice pretends to praise how good an older brother he is, that you can even cry. It's a pity, he is so inept at games. Chow turns to him in annoyance. Claire also joins the prince. She rests her hand on her chin and makes a thoughtful face. After a few seconds, he sighs dramatically and says that he has such a wonderful talent in games. Xiao explodes. He scolds them and asks them to stop. But he was taken lightly. He returns to the game and tells them not to cry when they are left with nothing. Claire continues to tease him. She asks when it will come. Maybe in the next life? Penny laughs softly as she watches them. She folds her hands on the table and remembers last night. Angel, right after transferring the divine powers, says that if the spy's goal is to keep the girl as long as possible in the game world, then there is nothing to worry about just yet. All she can do is bless Penny. And although this will not protect her from any physical force, on the other hand, no one will be able to get into her head. Penny sits on the bed and looks at her excitedly. The angel says that in the future she will be able to rely only on herself. Let her think things through. Penny clenches her hands tightly on the table again. The carriage finally stops in the middle of the forest, somewhere near a lake. Penny and Claire immediately happily run out and walk around the water while Dylan retrieves the map. He takes his eyes off the sheet in his hands and looks around confused. There must be an inn nearby. Penny sits on a pebble, watching the scenery. Claire carefully leans towards her and asks if she would like to taste some fruit to satisfy her hunger. Penny sighs heavily, but thanks and refuses. If she sees them, she will only want to eat more. Dylan draws a map. Chow approaches him. He asks if he found any food. The guy shakes his head dismissively. No. Chow says that everything in their supplies has already spoiled, and even the weapons that weren't enchanted with magic were already covered in erosion, even though they had only been on the road for 2 days. Dylan turns away, but thinks. Time here goes in a completely different way, and this proves that they are moving in the right direction. But this time, everything is going too fast somehow. After all, They still have to be very far from street territory. The boy's attention is drawn by Penny's loud exclamation. She runs after Claire and asks where the girl is going, and she moves straight towards the forest. The girl removes branches from her path and looks ahead thoughtfully. Her cheeks flush as she presses her palm to her lips. Penny watches her in confusion. Claire's eyes go misty. She smells something, and it's the scent of something very delicious. As if in a trance, she looks around and follows the smell. Confused, Penny with Chow and Dylan follow her uncertainly. Why don't they feel anything? What is this? Some kind of dog sense? The girl peeks out from behind the bushes and joyfully exclaims, "Here it is!" The others rush to her, and indeed, a recently lit fire appears in front of them, a small white tablecloth on which a box of food and cutlery is carefully laid. Claire and Penny immediately jump happily to the food. Chow is more practical. He cautiously approaches the fire, but says that the wood is not yet completely burned, so whoever left it here didn't have far to go. Dylan weaves from behind. He comes out of the bushes disinterestedly and replies that they can make a deal with him and then they won't have to sleep in the open. Confused, Penny pulls out a pink purse from her pocket and tries to hand it to the prince. She says that if he doesn't have enough funds, his mother gave her some. Dylan immediately interrupts her. That's not the point at all. With an important face, he explains that Street's territory is surrounded by forest, so the closer they get to their destination, the harder it will be to find a place to sleep. And if they don't want to sleep in a carriage, the best solution will still be to find an inn. The girl nods. Everything is clear. Dylan turns around and stares intently at the place they just came from. He frowns, but thinks, that inn he was looking for on the map. He must have been somewhere here last time. The team is distracted by a voice. It's a girl approaching them with a pile of firewood and branches. She wears a long black cape decorated with white stripes on which golden crosses are embroidered. She also has a hat with a cross on her head, and a long transparent cross can be seen around her neck. She raises her eyebrows in surprise and excitedly asks if something happened to them. Suddenly, the girl clings to a stone with her foot and screams in confusion. She flies into the air and, blushing, falls right at Claire's feet. Branches, carefully tied with a rope, fly somewhere nearby. The others immediately rush to her to check if everything is okay. The girl kneels awkwardly. A red scratch is visible on her face, but she does not pay attention to her, snorts her nose, and adjusts the hat on her head in embarrassment. With a big smile, she apologizes and says that her name is Teresa. She is a nun in the church. Teresa examines the group in front of her, but thoughtfully says that their clothes look like they are not local at all, and asks how she can help them. Claire and Penny happily rush to her. Salvation at last. One by one, they tell how they got here. The nun opens her eyes wide, after a minute of the story, and bangs her fist on her palm. That is, they have nothing to eat. The conclusion is correct. The company awkwardly thinks that this is still very mildly said. Penny uses her adorable baby face magic. She folds her hands in a plea, opens her eyes wide, and with an innocent look, quietly begins to ask for help. Her cheeks blush slightly to emphasize the image, but suddenly she is rudely interrupted. Dylan slaps her face with his palm, forcing her to stop the performance. He immediately gets down to business, kindly presses his palm to his heart, and with a smile asks to share the remaining food supplies, if there are any. They would be incredibly grateful to her. Penny shoves his hand away from her in shock and glares at him in annoyance. Teresa returns to the box. It is quite small. It will be difficult to divide this amount of food among 5. She sadly says that she took too little this time. But she has an idea. You can go to church, and there the girl will be able to cook a lot of delicious food for them. Penny and Claire exclaim joyfully and turn to Dylan, shooting the poor man's eyes in a silent request. The prince looks at them confused, but turns to Chow to ask his opinion. Surely he must have constructive thinking. But he meets with the same pleading eyes. The guy thinks annoyed. Is he going there too? Chow, blushing, hides his gaze from him. He grabs his head nervously. Okay, got it. The girls dance happily. Finally, they will be able to eat. Chow seems to copy his father, with the same indifferent face. He tries to pretend that he doesn't care, but his red cheeks betray joyful excitement. Teresa watches the group's joy with a gentle smile, but Dylan drills her with a suspicious, uncertain look. Finally, they enter the walls of the church. It is more like a castle. A large, spacious area, 3 floors, exquisite ornamentation on the walls. Chow asks in confusion how such a beautiful church can be located in such a deserted place. Teresa turns to them and explains that the nearby villages are not very rich, but they are religious. It was they who insisted on building a large church, even though it was not necessary. With a big smile, she claps her hands and says that she is going to cook. Chow awkwardly mutters into his fist that something very simple can be done. The main thing is as soon as possible. The nun thoughtfully agrees, but says that she will do everything much faster if one of them can help her. The girl looks at everyone, but stops at Claire. For example, her. Claire's eyes light up. She asks confusedly if it's about her, points a finger at herself, and blushes. Teresa gets down on one knee to be level with the girl. She smiles broadly at her, holds out her hand, and gently repeats, asking if she will help her. Claire stands confused in the middle of the kitchen and waits for orders, while Teresa is busily laying out the necessary products. She bustles around the kitchen and asks the girl to bring a knife and wash the beans. The girl quickly fulfills the request. The nun begins to cut the onion, but snorts her nose. Tears roll down her eyes, and although she tries to wipe them away, her face begins to burn even more. Teresa complains plaintively, while Claire gives her a frank look. She stands uncertainly with a bowl of beans in her hands and wonders why the lady chose her as her assistant. Teresa rubs her red eyes and sighs heavily. The other 3 looked like they couldn't do anything at all. Claire flinches. After all, she's right. It's unlikely that aristocrats were ever taught to serve themselves. But she still desperately hangs over the bowl, begins to wash the beans in sadness, and mumbles in a tearful voice. Of course, this is understandable. She is betrayed by the behavior of an ordinary person. After all, she is far from a noble. Confused, the woman shouts that she didn't mean it at all. Claire's cheeks heat up. She says uncertainly, quietly, that there is one person among the 3 that she really likes. Teresa's eyes light up with interest. Here they are, women's secrets. The girl sullenly leans over and looks at her reflection in the bowl of water. Small tears roll and fall directly into the container, forming circles in the reflection. Claire explains that when this person is around aristocrats, she constantly compares herself to them, and there is nothing she can do about it. They are like people from 2 different worlds, and she cannot be near her. After a few seconds, Claire breaks away from the bowl, embarrassed, and looks up at Teresa. She is listening to her attentively. The girl awkwardly apologizes for suddenly flooding her with information. In fact, she just reminded her of her older sister. Teresa smiles and nods in understanding. First love is wonderful. She approaches the girl and with a gentle smile folds her hands in prayer and says that although in their world there is a division between the rich and the poor, they are still equal before God, and each of them is still his beloved children. Her palm lands on Claire's head and gently ruffles her hair. The girl enthusiastically looks up at her, blushes, and repeats the woman's gesture. She also folds her hands in prayer. With a smile, she tells her that even though Claire was not lucky enough to be born into a noble family, she also has a purpose in this world. Teresa's voice becomes cheerful and playful. She dramatizes the initiation into knighthood. She says that as a sign of gratitude to the greatest cook Claire, who prepared dinner so diligently, she presents an award and holds out a candy. The girl plays along with her, gets down on one knee, and bows her head gratefully. They both laugh, and Claire pops a pink candy into her mouth. Her eyes instantly light up, and she enthusiastically exclaims that the candy is very sweet. The nun smiles joyfully and agrees. You can't eat anything like this anywhere else. Her gaze darkens, but smugly, as she says quietly, that she's glad she liked it so much. Claire curiously asks what's inside the candy. Teresa looks at her, but her lips stretch into a devilish smile. She puts her finger to her mouth, as if smugly showing his girlfriend. Nothing, just a drop of her blood. Penny and Claire walk down the aisle of the church. The girl rubs her stomach contentedly and sighs. She ate so well. She suggests Claire go to bed earlier, but Claire ignores her. She runs around excitedly, and blushing, she asks if she can rub her back. She always takes a bath before bed. Penny politely turns her down and confusedly starts running her fingers through her hair, trying to come up with an excuse. She says she's just used to doing it all on her own, although she's actually afraid that anything can happen in the bathroom. Claire whines in frustration. Penny walks into the bathroom and waves goodbye, saying she'll call the girl over as soon as she's done. She nods back and the door slams shut. With a heavy sigh, Claire collapses onto the bed. She remembers the nun's words about finding another purpose in life and anxiously clutches the pillow. Her eyes fill with tears. Claire quietly mumbles anxiously. What should she do now? Darkness covers her and she closes her eyes. Penny opens the door to the room, toweling her hair. She's dressed in a tank top and plain shorts, a stark contrast to her usual fancy clothes. The girl loudly calls Claire and says that she has already vacated the bathroom and she can go swimming. But he immediately shuts up when he sees Claire leaning against the pillow with her eyes closed, sleeping. Penny smiles gently and carefully covers her with the blanket. It's time for her to go to bed too. Darkness has already covered the building. In the room, Claire and Penny sleep peacefully, and only the ticking of the hands of the clocks, reflecting on the walls of the great church, can be heard in the silent silence. The second hand of the clock rises to 12, lining up with all the others. A bright yellow flash illuminates the room. Claire gets out of bed as if in a trance. Her head is raised high, her eyes are open. She silently slips out of the blanket. Black stripes stretch across the floor. They surround her legs like an evil spirit and order Claire to follow them. The girl obeys, but continues to wander along the empty, dark corridor. The black clots gather together until they form a single, large blob of demonic eyes and mouth. The creature grins horribly and praises Claire in a creepy voice. It envelops the girl's body. Black stripes begin to gently caress her face and call Claire her child. Her eyes are hazy, half closed. On them, you can barely recognize a bright blue shade. Claire opens her head and a faint voice escapes her throat as she calls the creature Mommy. Morning? Penny stretches and yawns loudly. The sun is already shining brightly through the window, lighting up the room. She wipes her eyes, squints from the light, and says hello. When no one answers her after a few seconds, the girl finally notices with surprise the empty bed next to her. Claire is gone. This is very strange, thinks the girl, and approaches her bed. Did she go to breakfast alone? Penny lifts the blanket and squints. Claire's ribbon for hair is lying alone next to the pillow. A bad premonition suddenly hits her in the head. Something is definitely not right. In a panic, Penny starts calling Claire and runs out of the room. She bursts into the corridor. Everything floats in front of her eyes. A tired Chow and Dylan come out of the room next to her, wiping their eyes. They complain about the noise. It's still too early. But Penny isn't listening. A panic attack overtakes her, and she rushes to her brother's feet and breathlessly tries to explain that Claire has disappeared. Her eyes fill with tears as she hysterically grabs Chow's clothes. The boy trembles in fear, but asks her to calm down, because he does not understand a word. Finally, the girl catches her breath. She shouts that Claire is nowhere. The boys look at her in fear, but frown. The trio is back in the girls' room. Dylan runs his hand over Claire's bed. The bed is already cold. That is, she got up before sunrise. Chow frowns and looks thoughtfully at Penny, wondering if she really just decided to go for a walk or pick some fruit or something. Penny desperately clutches the ribbon in her hand and hangs her head gloomily. It's impossible. If so, she would definitely tie her hair before leaving. Claire liked this tape very much. She almost never took it off. Chow frowns and again lays out the theory. There are no guards here at all because they are far outside the city. Maybe she met bandits. Penny sobs in fright, tears starting to well up in her eyes again. The brother tries to stop her tantrum but asks her to calm down. Even if they were thugs, they would rather attack Penny. Why would they need a maid? The girl wipes her eyes and apologizes. Her voice is shaking. She is very worried. Eventually, they approach the nun to explain the situation. Teresa's plate of bread falls out of her hands with a crash. She covers her mouth in shock. Isn't Claire anywhere? Penny nods, but anxiously asks if she saw her last night. The woman thoughtfully puts her hand to her face and remembers. Yes, I saw it. She had just finished the evening prayer and was about to go to bed, and that's when she met her, seeing her through the window. She knocked on her door, but Claire didn't respond. In the end, the woman decided that she had just gone for a walk before going to bed, so she didn't pay any attention to it. Teresa is silent for a few seconds, remembering her face in the darkness of the night. If you think about it, her gaze was so empty, as if she was not in control of her body. The nun folds her hands guiltily, but sadly lowers her head, saying that it is all her fault. If only she had been more attentive, this would not have happened. Teresa says that if they have any plan to find her, she will definitely help to make amends somehow. In fact, she has search magic, so if they have anything, Claire can try to find it. Penny, hopeful, hands her a white hair ribbon, asking if it's suitable for charms. Teresa happily takes it, and with one wave turns it into a butterfly. The ribbon immediately flies into the air, sparkling with a yellow glow. She explains with a smile that they need to follow him to find the owner. Chow presses his palm to his heart and bows his head. Thanks for the help. The butterfly circles around Penny and stops at the shoulder. The girl looks at him enthusiastically. Dylan returns to Penny and tries to reassure her. Claire doesn't have magic and doesn't know how to drive a carriage, so she couldn't go far. They have a great opportunity to catch up with her. Penny excitedly agrees and begins to walk forward. A butterfly flies up and leads them to the exit. The prince looks over his shoulder one last time to see Teresa's face. He doesn't even try to fake a smile, just frowns and squints suspiciously. The nun gently smiles and wishes them a happy journey, and may God guide them. She closes the door behind the band, and the church immediately falls into darkness. Dylan guesses everything. She bows her head. Suddenly, a pair of large black wings burst from her shoulders. The hat disappears, and the nun's clothes change into a long white dress. She throws back her hair, which instantly darkens, and two more wings peek out from the back of her head, slightly smaller, and envelop her head like a halo. She laughs smugly, showing sharp teeth. Even if we assume that the boy understands, her pupils light up with yellow light. Eyes, inhuman, black, predatory looking around in the darkness. It's already too late.